for doing that. Now, we do have a lot of apologies today, or a number of apologies today, and deputies. Now, I was tempted to go around the table, but the people I asked said, no, we know everybody, or we've met most of the people, at least on the screen. So I'm not going to waste a couple minutes going round saying if that's all right. But it might be a good idea when you first speak to just say, if I haven't said, come in, Sharon, or whatever, just say who you are and where you're from. That would be helpful, possibly. We've got a number of guests during the morning. Again, I think we'll introduce the guests as they arrive. Now, apologies. So I'm going to go through my list here, and Joe will check that I've got my list right complete. So first of all, apologies from Nick, but Angela, you're deputising. Thank you for that. Apologies from Giordani, but Stuart, you are deputising. Thank you. Apologies from Lisa Nobes, Leanne, you are deputising. Andrew Kelso and Ruth, you're deputising. Richardson, Kath, you're deputising. Thank you. Apologies from Ed Garrett, who's been called to a national meeting in London. But Richard, you're not deputising technically because you're a board member anyway. But you are going to cover Ed's items, so thank you for that. Apologies from Nick Rayner, Steve Feast, Peter Devlin, Andy Yakub, and then Susanna Howard. But Sharon, you're here for Susanna, so thank you for that. Did I miss that, Joe? Okay, in which case I'm going to move us on to questions from the public. We have had pricing 3 questions from Mr. Dooley and Simon. I'm going to come to you to read out. We're going to deal with these right at the beginning rather than carrying them forward to the end. We'll do any new questions we'll do again at the end. Simon, I'm going to ask you to read each question out, and then we'll go to the relevant person to answer each one. So over to you for the first one.
Okay, thanks very much, Bill. There are 3 questions then from Anthony Dooley. The first one is regarding the meeting. I would like to ask a question concerning the as yet unconfirmed minutes of the previous meeting held in Bury St Edmunds. You did not address my specific question about whether you still had confidence in the leadership of the NSFT. Whereas on previous occasions in meetings, you stated that you did confidence. Does your failure to maintain consistency indicate in reality that you do not have that confidence, and your reference to the Suffolk Mental Health Collaborative appears to confirm my position? When are you going to come clean in public and state what everyone else knows, that the NSFT needs to fail with avoidable consequences for far too many? That's the first question.
And Richard, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Dooley. So I've checked with Ed, and Ed feels he gave a full answer to the question at the last meeting, which was recorded, and there's nothing else to add at this point. Thank you.
Any questions or comments on that response from board members? No, in which case, Simon, back to you for the second question, please.
Okay, the second question then for Mr. Dooley is as follows. On the issue of inclusion of the public in personal attendance at meetings, why in indicating how to make the journey to such does the ICB seem to assume that all public have access to vehicles? Your guidance on how to attend does not include how to do so by public transport, assuming that transport not within the ICS. Why not, is the question.
Thanks, Simon. And Amanda, I'm going to come to you for that one.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anthony, for your question. We take your point, and we will make sure that going forward, we will include reference to accessing public transport in order to attend our board meetings.
Thanks, Amanda. Any comments, thoughts from board members? Otherwise, no. Question 3, Simon, please.
And the third and final question for Mr. Dooley is as follows. It may be my fault, memory, but I thought that the meeting in September was to be held at Inch, but I note now that it will be held in Colchester. That's...
And Amanda again.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Anthony. Indeed, you are correct. This meeting held in Ipswich today, but it was deemed appropriate to move the location to Colchester because we are very clear that we want to ensure that our board meetings are in various locations across North East Essex and Suffolk.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. Again, any questions or thoughts from board members? Otherwise, done. Thank you very much, colleagues. Let's move on then to item 3, the declarations of interest. So any declarations of interest, potential conflict of interest with any agenda item other than those of which we are aware, of course, and none noted. In which case, minutes of the last meeting held in the 25th of July. Now, there are 16 pages of those minutes, so I'm not going to turn the pages unless you want me to, but treating the whole en bloc, are there any issues of accuracy that people would like to raise? And no hands raised, so are we as for resolving that the draft minutes as received are a true and accurate record of the 25th of July meeting? Agreed. Lovely. Thank you very much. In which case, let's go on then to the matters arising item. Now, there are 6 matters arising in the log, as you will have seen. 2 of them are not yet due. There are 4 on which I'd like to receive an update today. One of them is actually scheduled complete, but I think a little bit of an update we should, the board should consider on that, despite the complete notifications. Let's deal with them in order. The first one is 2007 on PHM and data sets. And Stuart, you're the only one here from the group mentioned, so I'm coming to you for this one.
Thank you, Chair. Spoken to the team. So my team actually went to visit to the Greenlight Trust site and work out how we could support them in evaluating the programme of work, and they were going to come back to us with their ask. I'm just aware that they've just changed chief exec, so at this point it's probably going to disrupt it. But one positive thing I just want to say from that, and so it'll have to be ongoing for now, I think, is that we're just working at the moment to try and give all BCSFE partners access to the PHM dashboards, which is a really positive step forward again, how we work in partnership with all of our partners and can use that data to drive work forward.
That's helpful, Stuart. And that is a work in progress. Would you like it to stay on the action log for a few update? Or?
I think, Chair, it's just a question of how long it's going to take for Greenlight Trust to transition and all the rest of it. So I think it's something we are actively working with partners to do. My suggestion would be that maybe we take it back into the PHM group and pick it up as part and have it on the log here. That
would be excellent. Is everybody content that we send it back as we'll leave it to be kept there? Currently the case. Everybody happy? Yep. Agreed. Thank you very much. The next one is the funding allocation review 230995. And Howard, can I come to you for that one, please?
Yep, of course, Chair. The system finance process is working up the medium financial plan, which is a plan that encompasses 5 years, which I think will then lead to discussions and proposals on funding allocation arrangements within the system. So I think a good first draft will be ready for consideration at the ICB Finance Committee in November. I think from there we can probably decide on a good time to present that to board. So if you're happy, I'd suggest we probably close this action at this point, and we'll manage this through the ICB Finance Committee.
Okay. Any questions on Howard's? Everybody happy that we handle it that way back to the Finance Committee? Okay, agreed. You have. Now on to the item which is scheduled as noted as complete, the mortality wording and so on. Richard, can I come to you for an update on that, even though it's down in the log as complete, please?
Yes, so just to add to the note in the action log, we had a conversation at the executive 3 or 4 weeks ago. There is already on the BAF, the Board Assurance Framework, a risk related to the quality and safety of mental health services. So that's number 8. So after conversation and also further conversation with Will, we're amending that risk to take account of the issues that we talked about board meeting related to mortality, rather than creating a separate risk related to it. So we feel it's better to incorporate it into the existing risk. And that will come about at the next iteration of the BAF when it comes to the board next month. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Richard. And I see Amanda nodding. Is everybody content with that action? And again, are we happy to take that as complete and receive the update in the next BAF in November? Okay, everybody content? Lovely, thanks very much. And then the final one, which is 23101. Laura, can I come to you, please, for the update on the work in progress, the HIPC tour, please?
Yes, thank you. We held our most recent committee meeting earlier this month, and the terms of reference have now been agreed. We also discussed how we were going to start spending the 3.9 non-rent funding that's been allocated to us around healthies, which should very much be viewed as a catalyst. And evaluation is embedded in the work that's happening to make sure that we can make programs sustainable. We've agreed to focus on our most 20% most deprived locally rather than nationally, and we'll go into detail around that and our plus populations, who are our target groups, in our paper in November. And as an update, our operational group is meeting today to discuss how we're going to focus on our first priority, which is around cardiovascular case finding in our communities. Included in that will be the discussion on how we co-produce with our communities going forward. Thank you.
Okay, so board in November.
Yes, thank you.
Is everybody content with that update on the work in progress? Yeah, agreed. Good. Okay, so with those updates, is everybody happy globally to endorse them? That's the request of the board. Yep, duly endorsed. And then my final question is always, well, two questions really. Is everybody content with the actions that are carried forward to future meetings? And then the action log itself, are we content with that adequately captured the action you expected to come out from the 25th of June meeting? Again, everyone happy, true and accurate record. Wonderful. Lovely. Thanks very much, Case. On to the next item, which is the CEO's update. And I'm coming to you, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. So again, apologies from Eddie's national meeting with Amanda Pritchard and colleagues there. So a few updates from Ed and myself. So the first is related to industrial action. Colleagues will be aware in the tough week last week in terms of the industrial action. For the first time, junior doctors and consultants walked out simultaneously, and there was Christmas Day cover arrangements. Again, it's likely that consultants and junior doctors will also be going on strike on the 2nd, 3rd and 4th of October. So planning is already underway, as you can imagine, for that work. We need to thank local people for listening to our previous advice about using the right services during industrial action, and we recognise the disruption through cancelled appointments. Thank members and all staff in work that's gone into planning for the strike action, and which will continue into that week in October. In terms of another event that happened since the last board, we had the West Suffolk Community Connect event. So see Peter smiling. I think I unfortunately missed it, but it went really well. So that was a showcase event at the Athenaeum in Bury St Edmunds. Over 200 people attended. Main partners in the West Suffolk Alliance, stalls and lots of talks and things. So well done to all involved. It went really, really well. We're also pleased to say that Dr. Bethany, if you'll know, who was one of our local grown consultant clinical psychologists and also our co-ICB children's clinical lead, has produced a which aims to support parents with their mental health, and it's really broad across the country and indeed across other parts of Europe in terms of some of the things that Beth's actually writing about. So we're really pleased with that, and as now if you want to find out a little bit more about that. We're now well into our autumn COVID-19 booster campaign for over 65 clinical vulnerable and frontline NHS service workers, and we're performing well like last year with high numbers already coming through, but we're trying to get as many eligible patients in to get those jabs. Please say UN hosted Lord Markham, Parliamentary Secretary of State at the Department of Health and Social Care who visited to discuss the new hospital plans at Bury St Edmunds. So Lord Markham's been on a bit of a roadshow going around the new hospital programmed sites, and he learnt more about the current site maintenance program in relation to RAC and the ambitious plans in terms of the new. Also, hot off the press this week, national data has come out on our delayed discharge. Those individuals who are in hospital, at home, or in a different place. We're in the top 5 most improved systems in England, which is brilliant news and reflects all the brilliant work across our alliances. We're also tomorrow co-hosting a national event on healthy coastal communities over in Clacton, and we've got partners from across the country attending that. So we're hearing more about that and what comes out of it. And then finally, Ed probably wouldn't say it, but I will. Both Ed and Edward Creasy, Ipswich and Suffolk Alliance Chair, have been appointed as deputy lieutenants for Suffolk, alongside other respected individuals. So on behalf of the board, I'd like to say congratulations to both Ed and Edward, anyone called Edward, and the lieutenant involved supporting and deputising for Claire, our His Majesties for Suffolk. So we pass on our congratulations to both of them.
Lovely.
That's it.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much. And any questions for, well, but through Richard? No, noted. Okay, thanks very much. In which case, then the ICS system pressures 22-23. Now, Sharon, at short notice, you've been dropped into this, with apologies from Susanna, albeit for good. And we I don't know whether you want to say why Susanna's not here.
Her daughter's currently in labour, and as since Sunday. Yeah. So it's a tough time, I think. But anyway, Sharon. Thank you. So yes, I'm Sharon Brody and part of Susanna's team. I'm here today. So this is just to discuss the report from our event on Community Connect event on the 8th of September, where we held an ICP workshop, which was a follow-up to the report Winter Pressures event in May. And at that event, just as a quick reminder, we decided we wanted to help keep that focus on prevention, on personalisation, on our Anchors programme in terms of supporting local communities, and obviously continually learn and collaborate with people to do that. The event on May was a leaders event. The 8th of event was a public event, which I think so it was great. We had partners collaborating that as well. And that I won't obviously read the report, but I think the themes from those conclusions from that report were professionally curious about why things happen. We need to look at the data, but also look behind it. We need to focus on people and the outcomes we want for people, not just meeting targets. We need to plan ahead, starting right from the end of winter, and that we need to listen to people and, most importantly, also to our workforce who have that direct experience as well as those people that we serve. We need to collaborate, work in partnership. We need to learn from experience, which I think is what we're doing through these events, and also that we need to be creative and supportive leaders to make sure that we can lead change. So the ask today is for the ICB, the board, to receive the report and discuss how it will ensure that the learning shared by wider partners in the ICS can be incorporated into the ICB's work, short term and long term.
Okay, thank you very much. So, colleagues, any comments or thoughts? Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to respond to that last statement, and I'm sure we'll cover it in the next item, we are taking the learning from the system learning and incorporating into our plans going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter.
There's one thing I just wanted to bring to the board's attention. I think it's worth mentioning. There was a really interesting presentation from ESNED colleagues that pointed to the direct correlation between mental health as a primary cause of growth in emergency admissions and attendances in North East Essex. And I just think that was quite a strong piece of information that hadn't been quite as clearly presented as we'd seen before, particular to that locality. I just wonder if that's something we should just keep a strategic eye on and what we can learn from that particular pattern.
So just before I perhaps come to Carly, Angela and Kath maybe to comment, let me just go to Richard first and then I'll come to
Yeah, so just to respond to Peter, caught Andrew's eye, I attended ESNEF's board meeting and development session last week where we actually had a focus for an hour on mental health, and we touched on the data and started talking about some of the things that we might want to do moving forward through that. And subsequent to that, we're pulling together a small working group across EPOT as our mental health provider in Essex, ESNEF, ourselves through Laura and myself to kind of look in more detail at the findings of that work and what we might be able to do. I think just to add to that, the review work that Shane did on behalf of ESNEF, around 60 to 70%, I think Laura, Emma said, who's our locality director for EPOT, of attendances into community mental health services in North East Essex are new. So they are not known to EPOT or the system. So that's stark in terms of the need out there in North East Essex related to mental health coming into secondary mental health services. But happy to report back, Chair, as part of the work that will come on to with winter planning.
Thanks, Richard. Let me go back to Paul for an immediate response.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just in anticipation of that, I've already asked for it to be discussed at UECC committee when the work concludes. It'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now I've got a bunch of people here. So Angela and Kath, actually, if I come to you last, because it's in your patch, let me just go then around my list off. I'll go Stuart and then Frida, Laura. So Stuart first.
Thank you, Chair. And as part of that process, really welcomed. I think what was really powerful in that first session was the data story that Anna presented that helped to give us a basis about what we were looking at and actually trying to challenge some of the narrative that may have been built up. But I also want to really embrace what that was being said also around the importance of outcomes for our residents. I think when we're so highly pressured, we're focusing what we need to do around flow and other aspects, but actually going back to what is the outcomes we want for the people of living in SNE, and particularly looking at about what I think we focus on as well is the connectiveness across all this. So we talk about it from a UX perspective, but actually this is where the prevention aspect starts to come in, and actually about how we widen that lens, because the only way we're going to really solve this in the longer term is looking at better outcomes for local people, which will then impact on that as well.
And indeed, that's true not only for winter planning, but planning, is it? Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Frida, over to you.
Yeah, no, just to go back on to Peter's point and Richard's point about the mental health, I really enjoyed point 4.3, like in terms of the new model for mental health urgent care. And I've spoken to Dr. Karali, who presented that, I think, and it seems like a really interesting model to take into North East Essex, certainly. I'm not sure about Suffolk, but because it's, do you know which one
Yes.
Yeah, the urgent care for mental health people. It seems to be, it would really help general practice, that particular. I don't want to focus, because I know there's so many good presentations, but I think that was really interesting in terms of what it would do for general practice and helping us with acute mental health, because at the moment the access into the crisis team is very difficult, and it is a real problem to get people into urgent mental health facilities, and this seems like a really good model. And I wondered how, talking to just directing to Richard, really, whether we were considering this as a model in SNE.
Let me ask Richard to answer that.
So all options are on the table, Frida, I think, in terms of what we do related to the data that's come forward and the demand pressures we've got. I'm hesitant to rush into that being the answer to our problem until we understand a bit more what's underlying the data. So one of the things Shane and I agreed after the board session I mentioned earlier is to kind of unpick it even more to understand what are the presenting conditions and what are the kind of bespoke solutions we need for those, as opposed to kind of going straight to the Basildon model. Zeph, who's Director of Strategy, you'll know at EPOT, and I are working on that. So Zeph's been sponsoring it, and his team will be part of that group that I talked about earlier. So yes, we'll look at the model, but I can't say today we're definitely going to do that, but we do need to look at what other interventions might work best for North East Essex.
Go on, Frida. Yeah.
Just come back on Richard. That's great that you're looking at different models and you are considering the Basildon model. It's just there's a timeline thing with us in general practice is that, it's every winter we get, like every winter comes and nothing seems to sort of happen. So it'd be good to know a timeline in terms of acute mental health for the community services.
Go on, Richard, and then I'll go Paul.
Rather than try and agree a date right now, I think I need to do the first meeting and then look. There are a number of other interventions which I won't go into that we are putting into place and have put into place in North East Essex, like the ambulance response vehicle, but obviously there's more we can do.
Would this be, before I come to Paul, would this be a fair item to put as an update to the next board in an appropriate way?
Yes, if you'd like that, Chair. Yeah.
Could I just ask as well, Richard, if I could be involved in some of those discussions in terms of a general practice perspective or what would work?
You're more than welcome, Frida.
Thank you.
Volunteer, always welcome, Frida. Thank you. Paul.
Yeah, just a couple of things. So just on that point, of course, we'll make sure that's fully discussed at the UCC committee as an approach. So again, I think it's important we engage the whole system in that the right solution to that, as Richard has alluded to. But just going back on Stuart's point, I think when I present figures around, A&E activity and stuff and what have you, it's really important to understand that I'm presenting, acute-centric data, not population management data and outcomes. So that was really the big learning thing for me, that actually when we talk about population, it's much wider in terms of outcomes and it's actually about performance issues. And that's an important distinction. Thank you.
Laura, if I just hold you for a moment, if I may, because I suspect it's on this subject. Ruth?
Sorry. Just in terms of data, I know this is slightly different, but when we were looking at the development of the UTC, now the UECC in Ipswich, looking at exactly what turned up when, who could they be seen by, and actually really looking into that data enabled some really joint planning, and that's mostly based clinically, but actually there's potential for much wider opportunities there. So just if there's anything we can share with what that looks like, then that might be useful to you.
That's great. Thank you, Ruth. And Laura, sorry to hold you. I'll come to you, and then Angela and Kath will come your direction after that rich discussion. So, Laura?
It's just to update colleagues. So in response to Paul, Stuart, Frida, Richard and Ruth as well, we've agreed with Dr. Gordon that at the next North East Essex Alliance Committee, we will dedicate a significant amount of time to be able to discuss this with partners locally, because we recognise that actually there's a system response, as Paul has said. So we'll be able to feed that work in to the work that's happening around North East Essex. Thank you.
That's helpful, Laura. Thank you. So, Angela, Kath, who wants to go first? Do you want to go first, Angela? Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So thank you very much, and very interesting hearing the discussion here, and thank you to Richard for coming to our board meeting just to give that perspective. I think there's a couple of elements just to perhaps flag is certainly in terms of probably if you like, the pressures on our emergency and urgent care services and actually caring for people with mental health difficulties. I think we really need to focus on what principles of care do we have, what standards do we want to achieve, because I think we need that parity of esteem for those patients as well as our acutely unwell for other reasons. And I feel that's probably a starting point. I think going back to the data, I think that's very important. And I think we've recognised that probably visibility of the data across all providers, across all partners would be really useful. And I think some of that's there, but I think certainly we're very willing and keen to contribute to that, because I think we've certainly noticed in the North East Essex patch, as Shane's data indicated, that the number of young people and adults coming to our urgent and emergency services is really increasing significantly over time. I suppose just going back to Laura's point, really, I think for me, though, is we sort of focus a lot on the front door, quite rightly, but I think it's the prevention side. And I think what we've noticed is particularly perhaps for young people in particular, and actually for older adults, and we know the demography is changing over time, is what more can we do in terms of prevention? And because we are going to have a legacy, so I think it's not one thing or another. I think, as Richard said, it's more is what can we do in parallel, because I think we are not going to, whilst we fully support community model, I think we're not going to see that come to fruition very immediately. So I suppose it's about doing that work in parallel, but just a few observations. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, Angela. And Kath, do you want to add anything?
Just a few things, if that's okay. So the data I saw was at the West Suffolk Alliance session a couple of weeks ago, and was really quite struck by the difference with the number of people presenting in Colchester Hospital versus Ipswich Hospital. So recognise that some of the work that you mentioned, Richard, related to doing some work looking at the data and understanding. From my perspective, even though that isn't necessarily NSFT, what would be very interesting to find out is whether or not we're doing something different, which is making a difference, or is this heads up to that's going to be coming our way in Ipswich. So therefore, I think it would be helpful to be part of that piece of work if that would be if people would be happy with that. The other thing, I think I really agree on the issue of prevention. So I'm not a mental health clinician, but my experience from being part of NSFT and in my previous role is actually a lot of people presenting to emergency services with mental health problems. The focus often is that it's not admissions they need some help and support, and actually the longer people stay in the department, it's really clear that admission isn't often the answer. So therefore, why are people having to present to A&E as the only source of support? And for some it is first time presentation to any services, but actually I think we have to look at ourselves collectively and think, what are we not providing for people such that A&E is the only place they feel they can go to, yet we all know it's probably the most inappropriate place for people in mental health crisis to go for their benefits, aside from everything else. So I do think this warrants a really sort of significant piece of work. And then the final point I wanted to make, which proportionately will be small numbers, but impactfully, very proportionately, is about children and young people presenting in crisis, and often it's a result of care or family breakdowns in those circumstances. And most definitely admission to a tier 4 bed is generally not the answer, but I just don't think we've collectively got this right in terms of family crisis or care crisis, which results in an acute presentation to an A&E, which is again in the worst interests of the young person. So I do think there is some work to be done, and it's a real classic example of this doesn't sit with the acutes, it doesn't sit with the mental health providers, it doesn't sit with the local authorities. We have to do this together and incorporate in the voluntary sector in a way maybe that we aren't catching yet.
Okay, thank you very much. So thank you. Oh, sorry, Leanne, go on.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Leanne Joyce. I'm here deputising for Lisa. I thought it would be a good opportunity to come in at this point just to talk about some of the work that we have been doing specifically in Suffolk, but it has spread across into SNE. We have put a lot of different interventions in place that have been working collaboratively with health and social care, and I'd be interested when we're looking at the data to see if that data relates to children and young people within East and West Suffolk, because some of the sort of soft intelligence that's coming through at the moment indicates that a lot of the work that's been happening in the community has been preventing those numbers of young people presenting in those acute spaces. So I suppose it's just a point to say we've been doing a lot of work with NSFT, with Suffolk County Council, and I'm trying really hard at the moment to engage with Essex County Council to share that learning and to encourage a similar type approach.
Okay, that's really helpful. So, colleagues, one final one, Ruth, go on. Yeah, and put your microphone on.
Sorry, amateur. It's on a slightly different point, but it was in the part at the bottom of the report on enable people on the ground to lead change. They're agile and can better adapt to local needs. I just want to ensure that we expand on that and what that means. It's not just encouraging people to have a voice, but also the funding being non-recurrent or recurrent, what we can stop them doing when we need to respond, genuinely bringing people with lived experience and those with people in place to be a part of that. And I think that sentence has probably got quite a lot behind it, which we all know, but I just wanted to make that point.
No, thank you, Ruth. So, colleagues, thank you to all, for the debate today and that rich contribution with so many, should we say, positive sentiments about working together system learning from each other, and indeed contributions and volunteering to assist in the future work which is required. This is an ongoing, probably never-ending piece of work, in truth, is it not? Because we should always be learning, but a lot of learning from that. Sharon, just before I go to the next item, for which this is the lead-in, is there any more you would like to say from the ICP team's point of view?
No, I think it is important to take those things forward. I'm really pleased about, especially hearing voices of staff and as well as people, and committing around that. There is an awful lot of talk about mental health, and that seems to be the thing that's come forward, that people kind of have gravitated towards, but rightly because of that data. I would just say one brief comment about that mental health unit is I think the important thing about the Basildon unit, for me, I've visited it, is it's an open door. And my question would be, are there equal open doors everywhere? Especially when, as Richard says, people are coming to Colchester new and not known to services. But it's very positive to see, and obviously we'll be involved as we can. Okay, lovely. Thank you very much. So, colleagues, with thanks all round, and looking forward to the tremendous amount of further work to be done here, what we're going to do is take that as the, if you like, the intro to the next item, for which I'm going to go to Paul, which is, well, it's actually seasonal planning now for winter 23-24. So learning from that, Paul, and then I think you're going to introduce Sarah to present as well.
I'd like to introduce Sarah Noonan, Director of Operations, and Darren Maguire, who heads up our SCC Control Centre on a day-to-day basis, and they'll certainly take us through the approach within the paper. But Chair, if I may say a few words while they're settling down, I think that the first thing to say is this plan has clearly been through our UECC committee. It's been through SOAC. It has taken on some of the learning on board of the system learning around winter planning, which has been really helpful in terms of giving some greater perspective on how we approach. We have deliberately moved away from an 80-page document that details absolutely everything that we do. In part, this is because actually you lose the will to live and you cannot sort of focus on the things that really matter. So it is starting to build on a process of continuous improvement, as you alluded to, Chair, and actually needs to be seen in the context of planning really started. We provided our first submission to the national team and how we were going to manage throughout the year. So it does need to be seen in the context of all other submissions that we have undertaken as a system. So if I can introduce Sarah, that'd be fantastic. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you.
So welcome, Sarah and Darren. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm Sarah Noonan, Director of Operations. Thank you for having us. So as Paul says, for the purposes of today, we're just planning to summarise high-level principles and key messages. There's a huge amount of detail that sits underneath the pack that's been provided as part of today's papers. We're keen to avoid sharing hundreds of slides with the board, so that's intentional. This is a collaborative piece of work. It's been developed through wide engagement. All system partners have contributed and have got their own detailed plans, as I say, which sit underneath this system summary. It's built on best practice. So we've quite carefully taken examples that have been shared nationally to make sure that in development of our plans, we're considering opportunities which have been seen to be beneficial and seen positive impacts elsewhere. The plan has gone to and be supported by the Strategic Oversight and Assurance Committee, the ICB UEC Committee, NHS England, and has also informed the recent national narrative submission that we've made. The region have endorsed this plan and our approach as being the right one, which has been incredibly positive, and other systems have also been in touch asking for us to share the plan with them. So that all feels like a really good confirmation that we're moving in the right direction. In terms of planning, as we heard in the previous item, it's not a winter plan, it's around seasonal variation and that continuous planning, similar to the continuous learning. So the planning did start way back at the beginning of the year in terms of the initial planning submission. It's been built from the acute bed modelling and performance trajectories that have been submitted as part of that national planning cycle. So in terms of that, I think we've been on the front foot. I think historically, winter planning has often started towards the end of the summer. So we've certainly got a 6-month head start, I think, compared to previously. Place is really central in the development of and delivery of the plans. You'll see some slides that describe some of the activities happening within the alliances, the BCF and discharge funds and schemes to ensure that we're being responsive to the local need and demand have been really important and beneficial. There are plans being established in terms of delivering the mandates included in the recovering access to primary care, which of course will be really important, not only in terms of winter, but ongoing and our sustainable provision. Huge amount of work on mental health. We've just talked about quite a lot of that, but both trusts focus on flow and the discharge to assess work, which I think will continue to be really positive, and virtual ward. As a system, we've delivered really well on that. There was a plan for 111 beds and we've got 154 beds open. So over delivery on the plan in terms of that additional capacity that sits outside our acute bed base, which will no doubt provide loads of support over the winter months. In terms of grip and performance, we've got our operations centre in place 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which provides timely, dynamic management of escalation and balanced risk assessment. The new OPAL framework will be in place from November. And there's a lot of work going on to make sure that the key partners are able to respond to that, but is coming on really nicely. SNE is meeting planned performance trajectories, but the system does remain pressured. So we're certainly not where we would want to be, but in comparison to others around the region, we continue to perform fairly well. In terms of our programmes of work, so our improvement and transformation work with regard to UEC, there's significant triangulation, which we've focused on, which brings together a lot of the national best practice. I think some of you will have heard Chris Murray-Frost from ESIST talking about the high-performing hospital handover organisations. We had the UEC BAF last year. There's a regional peer review programme which every site, acute site, has participated in, with formal feedback and reports coming through from those, and also the UEC maturity matrix and engagement in the UEC universal offer, which is the offer put forward by the national team to support organisations with the key elements of what is felt to put us in the best position moving forward through winter. So that has led us to the development of the UEC 1 plan, which is a single plan with 7 work streams. Each has got an executive SRO, success measures in place, which are monitored through the UEC committee. It's intended to make sure we're doing the best we can with what we've got. So none of the work streams are dependent on lots of investment or big requirements for anything like that. It is about working differently, working together, and making sure we're getting the most we can out of collaboration and working either at system or alliance level. We've got innovations as well. So ICB-wide developments such as the Unscheduled Care Coordination Hub, which Hannah will be talking about later on the agenda, so I won't steal any of her thunder, but real examples of success working innovatively across the system. And then lastly, around population health management. So it will help us obviously understanding where we need to focus. Demand and capacity work is in development for that to give us further insights. But for this year, respiratory will be the focus, which we know all the data points to. And there's certainly a national focus around the development of the acute respiratory hubs, which we hope to have in place for this year in order to support those groups of patients during the colder time. And I'd just like to say thank you to everybody and their organisations for their contributions and continued commitment to this plan and the delivery of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Darren, did you want to add anything there?
No, just here to support any questions. So,
okay. Wonderful. Okay, and perhaps we could reiterate as a board Sarah's comments about thanks to all, because again, it's a system game, isn't it? A quick question from me, Sarah, if I may. You know, you mentioned virtual wards, and we've got roughly 50% more than planned at the moment, which is great. Given the national focus on virtual wards and how it seemed to be centrally, should we say, and politically so important, where are we if we were to benchmark ourselves nationally? Do we know that? Or is that something we could have a look at?
We can have a look. I think the fact that we're over trajectory in terms of open beds puts us in a really strong position.
Yeah.
There is obviously a focus on the utilisation of those beds because we need to assure ourselves that we're getting real extra capacity from that, and that we've got patients on in those beds. So it's one of the metrics that we look at. There are of course others which contribute to the benefit that we expect to see.
Excellent, thank you very much. So Paul?
If I can just add to that a bit, so certainly from a regional point of view, we do really well compared to our regional within the region. Just an important point, we need to remember where virtual ward beds came from, which is really about an extension of acute beds. But actually, rapidly, we are moving toward a step-up principle, which is about admission avoidance, which wasn't originally envisaged within a national framework. So again, a lot of work is happening with that with regards to further utilisation for this winter. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Angela?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think just to add to that, I think we're certainly seeing the virtual wards being really well embedded now in ESNEFT. And I think we sort of learned really as we've gone along that certain pathways are working very well, certainly our frailty pathways, and I'm sure there is more capacity there. And I think having done the analysis recently, discussing it with Shane, it certainly is bringing us benefits in terms of reduction in the beds being used. So that's a very positive thing. So I think it's going to evolve over time. There may be some pathways we have less focus on going through winter months, such as surgical pathways, but I think we're now seeing the benefits of it, or our patients are certainly seeing the benefits and some great feedback. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And perhaps for a future action, Simon, if I could ask you to log that into your brain and your jobs list, there might be a future positive communications on that, because it is not only is it important to us and our patients, of course, but it's important nationally. So thanks for that in anticipation. Richard?
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Paul. Just in terms of the 10 high impact interventions, are there any that you're particularly worried about in SNE where you feel we need to focus more as a board?
So following the self-assessment against the maturity matrix, every system was asked to identify a number of the 10 high impact interventions that we were going to focus on. So we have identified 5. And the reason we chose the 5 is that we scored less than the top score, really. So we had a pretty high bar in terms of where we did score. So I think it is around kind of additional stretch. And all of the 5 feature in the one plan or within those work streams, so that we make sure that we've got really good governance and oversight around them, and we can assure ourselves of the continued delivery against those areas.
Okay, thank you. Paul, and then I'll come to
you. If I can just add one thing. We've had a real transition this year in terms of sustainable funding, particularly with our local authority and discharge funds. And I think we've got a significant opportunity to really plan for the future. So again, an important part of this program and process is to review the impact of those actions to make sure we move quickly to change things that are not working, or we do more of the things that are working very well. Thank you.
Good point, Ruth.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to follow on just picking up what Paul's just said, the impact, but also evaluating actually what's bringing true benefit and what are we doing just because we do it. And I just wanted to offer us if necessary, and I think probably is, to contribute to this as from a primary care perspective, because there's an awful lot of emergency care goes on there, and we really need to have this linked up, including out of hours, of course.
Yeah, no, go on, Paul.
You'll notice within the winter or seasonal plans, apologies, there is a big section around primary care, and we're increasing having that conversation. So under the fuller stock take and how would we do now we approach urgent care within primary care is vastly important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Howard?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to support what Paul just said. There's a big opportunity, I think, as we go into next year, because the discharge funding increases again as we go into 24-25. So I don't think we're in the position yet where we've actually established the evaluation and how that ramp up is going to happen into next year. But I just wanted to flag that. I think it's a very big opportunity for us, and it sounds like a lot of the investments we're putting in place this year are having an impact, which is positive.
Okay, so colleagues, we're actually only asked to note, but I think note and endorse, noting, provided board members are content, but noting that this is, as we've said before, a never-ending job. And actually it's seasonal planning now, and not, apologies in advance if I ever slip into the winter planning. It's too easy, isn't it? So are we content to note and endorse? Thank you very much. And Sarah, Darren, thank you very much indeed. Okay, in which case, let's move on again to the Unscheduled Care Coordination Hub. Paul, if I ask you to say a few words, and then you're going to hand over to Hannah, I think. So all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. So clearly, apology from Nicola Cottington, who couldn't make it a while since today, but they asked me to say a few words on their behalf, and really a big thank you to them for championing this approach, which actually is to the benefits of us all. I would simply just say that this sort of project or innovation really started from the place of how do we make sure that patients who are waiting a very long time in ambulance queues essentially can be managed more properly, much more quickly. But as you quickly find out, and as part of this presentation, it is much more than that, and actually requires a lot of system partnership and collaborative to make this forward, and gives us a vast number of opportunities to thoroughly think about how we manage locally and cater for the patient needs as quickly as possible in the right place, right time approach. So Anna, over to you. Thank you. And by the way, a big thank you for all the hard work you've undertaken to bring us to this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. My name's Hannah Ponce. I'm the transformation lead for SNE for all things UEC. So I'm going to just really whistle stop through this, because I know quite a few of you had this presentation before, so my apologies. But what we were trying to look at and change was this story that we keep hearing about over and over again of our elderly patients falling at home and then having a long wait for an ambulance to come to them, and then sometimes a long patient handover delay. They go into hospital. We do like to do lots of tests once they've reached hospital, and obviously they're in a deteriorated state for their long lie and having a fall, and then they do tend to stay in hospital a long time and need a large package of care on the other side. So we're trying to change that journey, and we've got some fantastic community urgent response teams, usually led by therapists, but I'll talk more about those as we go on. But they can go out to our patients, pick them up off the floor, give them some treatment, and then wrap care and support around them to try and keep them at home and avoid them going into hospital if appropriate. So we are actually mandated to do this. We were asked by NHSE as part of lots of different places, but we're doing this because we want to change patient outcomes. And I was really pleased to hear the conversations that were happening just as I come in. The focus of this project is about improving the patient's outcomes. It's a long story. Actually, this bit comes from some more work that we were doing. So about 2 years ago, we were asked to ask the ambulance service whether we could get access to the stack. So can we look at those patients waiting ambulances? So the stack is what we refer to as people waiting for ambulances to be dispatched. And so we've been trying to get that for a while. So we've been working on this. And one of the solutions, digital solutions, was this cleric portal. So a way of transferring from the ambulance stack to our UCRS teams using a digital solution. So the portal actually came in last November. So we're nearly a year using the portal. But the Unscheduled Care Coordination Hub was the next step. What more can we do looking for these patients? So Neil Maloney set us off on this task of people being in the right place, first time, every time when they became into an urgent need. And we were trying to ensure that the patients have the best possible outcomes. So we wanted to be really efficient and effective to manage that need. We wanted a clinical decision-making tool where clinicians could come together and find the best pathway for those patients. And we changed the default of taking patients to hospital to be safe? Can we try and keep them at home if it's safe to do so? So we came up with this model of the hub, as we refer to it, being a navigator for all the different community systems and community services that we have out there, providing expertise and direct access into these places. So as phase one of the model, we just looked at that very top red arrow at the top, the ambulance stack, but we have aspirations to do a lot more. So we went live as a test and learn on the 12th of April. We went to just test it for 8 weeks. It's still happening. It's going on next door as the community hub. But it was someone from East. It was from someone from PPG or GP Fed coming together, and a therapist coming together, looking through the stack and seeing what's the different alternatives that they can have. We've had lots and lots of different system partners come and visit us and also be involved in the stack to find out what's happening. June, the same day it was the 75th anniversary, it was our 50th day. So that's the room next door. We had a little bit of a celebration. And I'm just going to give you some of the figures for our first 50 days. We're just coming up to 100 days of having it. So we talk about a lot of patients. So we look at the stack, and the great thing about it is that we've got all the patient notes behind us. So we can look at all their System 1 record. We can see all the medications that they might be on, and we discuss that patient as an MDT to say what's more appropriate for this patient moving forward. If we think they're more appropriate, so in the first 50 days, it was 1,323 that we discussed, and just over 1,000 we thought were more appropriate for a different service. Some of that might be the CAS, which is provided by PPG, which is a clinical assessment service with T, our advanced nurse practitioner sitting next door, maybe telephone triaging, maybe writing a prescription, moving forward that way. With GP Fed, we have done some visiting cars as well. So we've made able to dispatch a GP and a car out to do some home visits. We've got our UCRS services, and we've also been able to use community services and step up onto virtual ward as well. So for our first 50 days, we did avoid the dispatch of 795 ambulances. That was just looking at Cat 3s to 5 calls. So we've not really dealt with Cat 2s just yet. We have aspirations to get there. So this is just the cleric data. So when we go back to when we started access to the stack, it was about 50 calls a month that were passed on from the ambulance stack into our UCRS teams. Last month, we did our greatest number, just under 500 calls being passed on over to our 3 teams, and with 80% exception rate for the ones that were passed over. And the stack project did win a HSJ award. Past that, but we've got a lot more opportunities that we can move into. And I'm not going to go through all of those, but I'm sure you can all come up with some that we've got real opportunities to do something different here. So our next step is that we've secured some non-recurrent funding to push the stack in, to push the hub into the next 6 months. We found a home. We're going to get some operational leads and get some more permanent staff coming in. We really need to get better on our data capture. I've committed to doing a retrospective audit on some of the impacts of the patients that we kept at home. I know our primary care colleagues are really interested to see that data. We want to increase the scope and see what more we can do. We really want to get the virtual ward step up straight from the ambulance stack into the virtual ward. That's a great opportunity for us. And then we need a business case moving forward.
Hannah, that's great. Do you want to add anything, Paul?
Yes, if I may, Chair, just a couple of things. So, as you know, Cat 1 to Cat 4 is essentially a measure of how urgent the patient requirements. So C1 being a heart attack, for example, in terms of conveying the patients. I think the other thing that has recently changed nationally is there has now been an agreement to segregate Category 2, which means there'll be further opportunities, and that's just happened literally within a week or so in terms of how we move forward. I think the important point of this approach isn't just about how many ambulances can you prevent conveyancing, and again making sure the patient gets to the right place in the right time, but it's also an opportunity to really identify any gaps in our services and how we might think about future commissioning, what the gaps might be. So if we have a patient and we have no other choice but an A&E, attendance, ambulance, if there were another service, and actually we should be thinking about, do we commission the services differently? So massive opportunity in that sense in terms of learning. And I think, though, there is an important point that I know you haven't mentioned, I know you're doing it, but you haven't mentioned it, which is the outcome and equality impact assessment. We need to try and spend a bit of time understanding the impact on patients. So again, I know you're driving a piece of work forward to try and understand and chase a number of patients to make sure that it was the right outcome for them in terms of quality of care going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Paul. Frida?
Yeah, I think this is an excellent initiative. I really do. Just a technical point, rather very quickly, is that majority of GPs in North East Essex are EMIS based. So how do you get the information? Because we're not System 1.
So PPG have access to a lot of notes through the out of the contract that they have.
The PPG, is that Suffolk based?
No.
Oh, okay. I'm not out of hours based. Okay, thank you.
Happy with that, Frida? Yeah, good. Thanks, Howard.
Thank you. First of all, congratulations on the HSJ award. So I can't believe you skipped over that, but that's really exciting, isn't it? So well done. I think it's a really good example of delivery and also linking the evidence base. I've got concerns about the recurrent funding and the production of the business case. I think it'd be great if you could just say what support and help you need in the development of that, because I think this is a very interesting test case for us, from my perspective as Director of Finance for the whole ICS, about how we perhaps better utilise our growth funding. But I'm just very interested in your thoughts on what support and help you need to develop that.
I'd be very welcome to take some support from that, because it's a very unique project in the fact that it doesn't belong to an organisation. It's lots of organisations coming together to do something that's great. So yes, I really need some advice as we grow as an ICB on how to do that. NHSE have directed us that the funding should be looked at BCF, that we should be looking at BCF funding for this.
Okay, and that makes sense, doesn't it? Truly system, maybe, but let me come to Paul.
Yeah, I'll attempt to answer that question. I would. It's essentially, no, absolutely, and as well, nationally, this has been picked up as good practice, and we are being encouraged to come up with a system solution to make it happen. Essentially, I think there will be a conversation, which will be I guess possibly a difficult conversation, which is around actually who benefits from that process in terms of activity and resources. And I think, our care provider will benefit because there'll be less patients turning up. Our ambulance services will benefit because they'll have to convey less patient in theory, and there will be a drive to actually increase our capacity within our community services. So again, the money is the money, and there will have to be a conversation about how we move the money around the system to be able to make this a reality as we move forward. I think, however, I don't think it's necessarily just about the money. I think it's about physical and people resources, and encouraging our provider to think about how they move, paramedics, for example, to work within the system. So I don't think it should be a purely money-focused conversation, but actually a people's and resource-focused conversation. Thank you.
And in that list of beneficiaries as well, Paul, we mustn't forget, must we, that the patient benefits. Absolutely. Let me go to Howard and then Angela, then Ruth. Go on, Howard.
First thing, yeah, happy to help. Absolutely. And I think you're right, Paul. There is that sort of wider sort of system impact. I kind of see this as there's a case here just on this one, but I think there's also some principles actually we can adopt on the back of this particular case that maybe we can adopt for other cases going forward. So from that point of view, it's quite an interesting business case. I'm looking forward to seeing it come through.
So action there, you're going to help.
Yeah.
Okay, Angela.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. Absolutely very supportive of this programme of work. I suppose it came back a bit to thinking about the funding for it, and going back to Howard's point, because I was wondering if actually the resources would vary according to our areas of deprivation. We know some people may need a lot more support, and I suppose some of it is how do we incorporate that learning in time to manage to keep this going, because I think it's a really important, and it's been, I think it's been really well received. So that was my question, really. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. Oh, sorry, Paul. Did you want to respond?
If I can come back to, I think this is really important, and I hope you would agree. This isn't about preventing local innovation. this is about making sure the patient gets to the right place at the right time and utilizing local innovation. So actually local is crucial to this. And we already know there are slight difference between the North East Essex side and the Suffolk side and there's some learning to be shared around. We take local approaches. So absolutely the right question. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Ruth?
Yeah, and I just think that learning from it, one of the things that I've found extremely useful, and if anybody's not been and sat in, I suggest you do, is seeing how other people work. As system partners, it's so easy to make assumptions if we don't know actually what other people do. So I think as a thing for learning for leaders, but also for succession for people coming through to see how something like this can work.
Wonderful, thank you. And then Maddie.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation and the patient stories, which is so important as part of this. And I think it really speaks to our values, this work of collaboration and creativity. So I have a question about geographical variation and whether you have looked at that, and just sort of going back to answer the question, what might be missing, and linked to that question, I suppose, is a point that even better if will be if the patient doesn't need to call the ambulance in the first place. And I guess this speaks to the work that we're doing in our integrated neighbourhood teams, and that we need to continue to invest in and grow within our neighbourhoods to support people to stay well at home and to avoid that call in the first place. So I think that's something we need to really keep our eyes on. Thank you.
Okay, should we take that as agreed and noted? Yeah, Kath?
Thank you. I think this is fantastic work, and congratulations. I wonder if one of the things that we could be very focused on is the outcome measures, and I don't mean in terms of percentage of people conveyed, etc. But actually, I'm thinking about measures if they can be calculated, such as remaining lives at home. We know that older people are often treated as commodities in terms of being passed through a pathway, which results in too many people never returning to their home again. And so I think there are some things which may help remind us what we're here for, as opposed to it just being about performance and data. The other thing, particularly maybe in the areas of greater deprivation, and we do need to think about the impact on local authority where there is long-term care costs as a result of maybe the wrong pathway being followed. So we need to think about the financial impact, positive impact on the local authority, but taking into account the demand, change in demand on care capacity requirements. And that might also help market management with regard to care homes if you need them less. Actually, we're not so beholden to the care homes in terms of their pricing. So there are some other wider measures of impact, system impact, social impact, and person impact that I think would make this something like no other that I've seen.
And finally, Paul.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo the point, but simply to make a bit of a statement to say we shouldn't fall into the trap of making this a system-centric process, but actually make sure it links into the alliance place-based outcomes, which is about staying well, essentially. And I think that should be a broad measure, and this is a contributor to that measure. So I take the point, but let's not make sure it doesn't become an industry in itself. It's a facilitating sort of service.
Okay, well, we'll go on, Ruth. Final comment.
Sorry, just one tiny thing. This is very, very positive. But can we just make sure we do also look at the unintended consequences, and that things maybe do need tweaking.
Okay, so thanks, colleagues. I think it's probably fair. Hannah, thank you very much to you and team, and Paul, thank you. I think it's fair to say the board's excited by this project and looks forward to the future evaluation as well, and outcomes for both system partners across the piece, as well as our patients, and also looks forward to the long-term sustainability issues. And thank you, Howard, for offering to help with that process. So we're actually only asked to note, but should we also note with enthusiastic support for the future work, and look forward to at an appropriate time a future update. Let's not set that update now, but I'm guessing it's going to be 6 months or so, or perhaps after the end of the financial year or whatever. But let's schedule an update and see how we did in the year as a whole. Okay, everybody content? Marvellous. Thank you very much. So we're a little bit behind, and I wanted us to be ahead, really, because you probably have gathered there's no break scheduled in this agenda. And at the moment, you are eating into any possible break time. But let's go on to the ICS demand and capacity project findings. And Richard.
Thank you, Chair. No pressure then to keep you from your break with your tea. So it actually complements the previous reports quite well in that this turns our attention to the longer term. So over a 10-year trajectory, what is actual demand looking like and what's some of the capacity challenges that we are likely to experience? First thing to say is a huge thank you to Dr. Alex Royan and Becky Jarvis, who've helped lead and coordinate this work across the system over the last year. And those of you who had a look through the paper will see we haven't come up with the magic answers, I'm afraid, to the challenges that you'll see presented in the paper. So I'll get that in right up front. Just briefly then, just to take you through the background and then some of the headlines that have come out of the work to date. In section 1.1 and 1.2, that's just a little bit about the background. But we looked at this last year, and I think collectively said we kind of just need to get a better indication of what demand was going to look like over the longer term to help influence partly our joint forward plan and our wider strategic planning across the health and care system. And the other element I think that kicked this off was the brilliant work that's happening in West Suffolk in terms of the new hospital build and the wider future system programme in the West, which was looking obviously on a longer time trajectory, and how it made sense that we looked at this more broadly then across the ICS. So the scope at this first stage was acute care, primary GP care, community health care, and adult social care. You'll see at 1.3 the objectives, which effectively is to co-design a 10-year demand and capacity model for health and care services across our ICS, starting with a do nothing option, and then looking at how we might mitigate some of that demand that is likely to present according to the model with a number of scenarios. We've had a lot of engagement. Thank you to all partners in terms of that. And we've also had really helpfully a GP advisory group that's been working on the primary care aspect of this and actually really owning and driving that particular work. So at this stage, you'll see that where we've done well on is the arguably easier part, which is the 10-year projections on demand. We've overlaid the known stuff that we're looking to do and are doing onto that, but probably unsurprising to most, it still leaves with a significant challenge subject to those demand projections being accurate. So just to give you a sense of some of the findings, so starting with primary care at section 2.1, effectively, the primary care workload is considered through this work unsustainable at risk of worsening, given the significant challenges we've got with our GP workforce numbers. It's estimated through the work that we've got a shortfall of around 70 GPs across the ICS, subject to those unmet demand projections that have been modelled. And even with when we start to overlay some of the known interventions, particularly some of the digital first initiatives, etc., it will still leave us with a significant gap, as you'll see on that first two bullet points. It's a similar story in terms of our acute, so planned and unplanned. We've got comparable growth levels of between 28 and 43% demand over that 10-year time horizon, again, subject to all the assumptions that have played into this detailed model. And when we overlay the known interventions in both of our acute and community trusts, probably after the next 4 to 5 years, it starts to look that we are going to have rising significant challenge that we'll need to mitigate. Now, the work you may come in later if we've got time. Clearly, the work that West Suffolk Hospital are doing is actually looking on a longer time trajectory with the new hospital build, how to mitigate some of that growth. So that is playing in. But even notwithstanding that, we've still got some way to go to try and mitigate fully those demand projections. And just to say with all of this, clearly we aren't out of line or out of kilter with the rest of the country, but actually we've now done the work that demonstrates what that's likely to be over that 10-year horizon. Similarly, on the penultimate bullet point, given the demand projections in our acute and our primary care, it has a knock-on effect on community and also to some extent social care. And you'll see there we've modelled for starters in North East Essex, where we've had access to the data, that we'll see an average shortfall of 2,500 discharges where community services and social care would need to pick up and do more through that discharge to assess work. And similarly in adult social care, we're expecting to see 57% increase in demand over that 10-year time horizon. So both Essex County Council and Suffolk County Council have been key partners within this work. So that's painting a slightly negative picture, but I think a kind of realistic picture of what the next 10 years could bring. What we're now starting to turn our attention to at Section 3 is that, so what are we going to do about it? What more can we do as a system, as a set of health and care partners, to try and get under the bonnet of those demand projections and start to think innovatively and radically about what can we do to try and offset some of those projections. We have had some support through Grant Thornton, who are the organisation that helped us with this work at some, as they've described it, radical scenarios. We're not convinced they're quite as radical as they would need to be to enable to mitigate those projections I've just outlined. So I think it's incumbent on ourselves as partners to actually start to think through what are some of the things that we might want to do. And I haven't got a preordained list, but we're looking to schedule at the next development session for the board in October some time to actually do that work. So to have a proper longer conversation around what the findings of this work are showing, and also some of the things that we might need to start thinking about to mitigate those pressures. So given the time, well, I'll probably leave you there. It's a bit of a taster, but welcome any initial questions or comments.
Thank you, Richard. And some significant numbers there, but it is right. Remember, a board's role, and I know you all buy into this, is we've got to look at what we've done and how we've done, but it's really important that we look at the future and what's coming. And that's it would be very, very negative if we didn't give this due consideration. Let me go Frida, Howard, and then Paul. So Frida.
Thank you, and thank you, Rich, for this report. I was on a high after the hub, and now I'm on a bit of a low after this one. But having said that, I just want to reiterate the importance of the state in this workforce issues, because, as you mentioned rightly, West Suffolk, the whole positive is based on a new hospital, and that's right. But in primary care, for instance, in North East Essex and parts of Suffolk, the estates are so bad we can't accommodate increasing workforce. So it's all very well and right to concentrate on workforce and how we can attract people, but if our estates are so bad and there's no way of fitting people in, then we're stuck.
Yeah, good point. Let me go to Richard to respond to that.
I would absolutely agree. I think what this is hopefully is flushing out what's going to happen if we don't see change, and that's got to be more than just the workforce. That's got to be a state. It's got to be digital. It's got to be different ways and models of working with our local communities, prevention, the whole thing. So I think what this work is hopefully doing is giving a bit of a push to us to say, okay, if we carry on as we are now, we're not going to be able to meet those projections. So what more can we do? And obviously, we've got the work that's happening, looking at my Alliance Director colleagues around the primary care strategy, which I know includes that estates piece, looking at the current state of it and what more we might need to do.
Okay, thank you. Howard?
I think this is really excellent and timely piece of work, actually, and there's a good opportunity to sort of try to bring it, or maybe this will help bring the medium-term financial plan to life. And it just speaks to linking up, the alliance strategies, the joint forward plan, etc. And we should all be questioning ourselves or challenging ourselves to say, well, what's going to be different in the next few years, or how are we going to meet this particular challenge if we stand behind these numbers? So because they're really significant when you translate them into financial pressures, for example, or people pressures. Yeah.
Everything pressures.
Yeah.
And again, colleagues, I know you know this, but just to remind you, we have together agreed that we will be an inquisitive and restless board, and this is part of, I think, of that specific restlessness, if that's right. Now I've got Paul, Angela, Kirsten, and then Maddie. So let me go in that order, unless that doesn't work. So Paul.
Thank you. I'd like to echo Howard's comments. Really, I think whilst the messaging is stark, I think this is a really positive piece of work. And I guess for me, you could be forgiven to think, oh, we're going to need more hospital beds, we're getting a lot more infrastructure within acute. Actually, what it starts to do is to start to ask us the question, how do we further the integration agenda? How do we further the primary care infrastructure? How do we further community services and go into the prevention agenda to be able to mitigate those risks going forward? So actually, it's quite a pivotal piece of work, I think, in terms of redirecting some of our effort and focuses going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Paul. Angela?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Richard. There was a couple of points of certainly around primary care, and I think certainly we've already mentioned the estate, but I think it's around that training, retention, recruitment, and I'm sure that's happening in part of the strategy, but it almost seems even more urgent now, isn't it, to say how are we going to address that? And I think the second question was really back to Howard's point, really, is, we've got our medium-term financial plan, but actually does that need to be, this is a 10-year programme we're looking at, so does that need to extend to 2035 so we actually see what the implications are across the system? It was just a question. Thank you.
Maybe, Richard, I won't ask you to answer that, but maybe that's something that we cover in the board development because it's an excellent question. So thank you for that. Kirsten?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Richard, for the report. My question is, have you had voluntary sector input into this? There will be demand and capacity issues for voluntary sector as well going forward, but voluntary sector could also be the answer to some of the issues. So it'd be good to get a panel of people together to talk this through.
The honest answer is I can't remember. I'll check with Alex. So the fact I don't remember probably implies not onto the group that's been looking at it. But if we can pick up with Alex and Becky offline, because I think, as I said, this is almost setting out the do nothing. The next more important step is, and what we're going to do about it. And I absolutely agree that the voluntary care and social enterprise sector is a major part of the answer to that. So I'll pick up as an action to talk to you offline.
Great. Let's note that as an action, Joe. Thank you. Maddie?
Thank you. So my question, Richard, which is very live in Ipswich and East Suffolk, was just whether the forecasts are taking into account not only the change in population health needs, but also the growth of Colchester, of Felixstowe, of Haverhill and other communities. So this is the result of both of those sets of modelling, is it?
I think, Laura, you and Alex had an email exchange on this a couple of weeks ago. I think it did in part, but only on the basis of what we knew. So we didn't have the detailed assumptions from the district and boroughs. So I suspect it will need to have another, and again, a bit similar to the seasonal, already fall into the trap. The seasonal plan, this is never ending. This will be a live model that will need to continually update. So I think we need to do some more work on making sure that those are being plugged in. But Laura, do you recall anything further from what Alex said on the email?
No, Richard, I think you're accurate. I think we've got further work to do. Thank you.
Okay, work to do. Did you want to come back, Maddie?
Yeah, thank you. I think that would be really helpful to confirm and to ensure that both are considered as we move forward. And just linked to Kirsten's point as well, I'm also mindful in the voluntary sector, but also consideration of needs for pharmacy services, dental and optometry. And I think we just need to think about the whole primary care family in this. And yes, I think the primary care strategy is the piece of work that needs to progress our response. Thank you.
Yeah, noted. Thank you, Stuart, and then Ewan. So, Stuart.
As ever, I think, thank you. I think the approach has been really helpful. I know from an SEC perspective, I think adult social care have really found this as a good catalyst and enabler to start to think about actually starting to define demand within social care, which I don't think we've done before either. So I think the general process has helped and has also enabled us to ask a lot of questions, because I think ultimately it's often not the number itself that comes out. It's more about what are the assumptions and how things work. And I think for me, it's great to hear everybody talking about prevention. And maybe I'm putting a kind of a hand up about one area. But I think given what we're seeing with our population, we've talked about inequalities and deprivation. People start their ill health earlier in their journey. I think for me, it's putting the line in the sand around multimorbidity within this and really starting to think about designing services around people, and the thing that just flagged to me was we were looking at the COPD data. You've got 35,000 people with COPD in the SNE area. Of which on average, most of those patients have on average 5 long-term conditions. And I think that just starts to talk about how and then that then feeds into things like workforce. Do you need such specific workforce? Or we talk about more generalized things? And I think that's the way we need to look at this if we're going to be radical, is starting to look around the needs of our cohorts of patients and starting to think around that.
Thank you, Stuart. And then Ewan.
Yeah, it's a similar point, really. I think even in a world where we had enough revenue and capital to service this demand, there aren't going to be sufficient trained staff across the whole range of providers. So I think this really does force us to push hard on prevention and particularly to try and address some of the inequalities where, as well as there being a lot of ill health, there will be a lot of demand generated. So, there is a lead in time, so we need to push quite hard on that.
Okay, thank you. Ruth and then Peter.
Just a little thought of the population growth does also bring us opportunities for workforce. So just to think of it in that way as well, and potentially for estates with builders.
Yeah, Thank you, Peter.
Just taking a challenge of keeping us restless and sort of questioning and challenging ourselves. If we didn't exist, my history of working in NHS would mean we will continue to invest heavily in acute hospitals, and all of our plans are set to do just that with our elective care units, our diagnostic treatment units, our new hospitals. So the question is, what are we going to do about it? Because there is no push nationally for primary care estate. There isn't, and so all three of us are sat on behalf of general practice, lots of ticking issues in general, and we have the aspirations, we know what the right thing to do is, and it's probably something that we as an ICB need to make our own stand on, and we can't meet all the primary care needs, I don't think we can, but we need to have a structured approach to prioritise them, to say, so be it population growth or really poor quality in the existing estate, and that requires us collectively to get behind that as a vision, and there is going to be constrained revenue and capital, and that requires prioritisation around this table, I think, and because it's local resource, it's not coming national. We had 2 or 3 years where we did get national funding for primary care, and we were able to make good progress, and that just doesn't exist at the minute. So just I think a plea for us with our infrastructure strategy that's when it comes to the next version, and the primary care strategy, just to hold this conversation in mind when we get there.
Okay. Thank you. So I think, colleagues, we're saying that we're almost violently in agreement that this is a really important piece of work that, as colleagues have said, will be never ending, but that as an inquisitive and restless board, we are going to do. We're going to get on with this. We're asked to support the next steps, which I won't read out. They're in the paper in front of you. Unless anybody says differently, I think we're supporting the next steps. We see the importance of this with the future look. We'll focus in more detail at the next board development session, and then Richard, no doubt, will bring it back to a future board, which would be November or January.
So Howard sparked something I wanted to say actually to add to this. So the Nirvana piece is we've got the estate strategy work going on, we've got the medium-term financial plan going on, we've got the long-term workforce planning going on, and we've got this. So we've spoken in one of our groups within the ICB, how do we overlay those 4 key pieces of work so we've got a consistent story to tell. So I don't think we'll be ready by October at the development session on that, but what we're trying to do is probably start to drip feed this through the next 4 or 5 board meetings. That's okay, Chair. So the next one will fill this in a bit more in October, and then I'd quite like to come back at the December development session where we've got all of those pieces of work overlaid so we can see the full story.
So this may well be a board, let's call it regular updates. Yeah. Everybody content? Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you very much. And Richard, thank you for getting us very close to back on time there. Now, the West Suffolk Alliance update, transforming HR policy, etc. Peter.
They are out there.
Oh, they're outside, are they? Okay. So shall we invite them in? And would you mind, Sarah? Thank you very, very much. And once they're in, let you do the intro, Peter. And then if we're on time, perhaps we'll have a coffee, a 5-minute break. As I know, we've been going an hour and a half, haven't we now? And it is warm in here, or is it me? Yeah. And thank you for opening the window, Maddie. Appreciated that. But if we can get a short break, I think it will help us. Oh, well done. Thanks, Laura. It's actually sunny out there. I didn't realise that. Yeah, is it? Yeah. Oh, that's nice. That's a cool breeze, isn't it? Thank you. Okay. Did you find them? They're coming. Great.
So.
Okay. We'll give them a minute. They're sucking out your break time now.
Drape it around you.
But go in the far end, guys. Yep. Morning all, and you've got some microphones at the end for those who are going to speak. Make yourself comfortable. And Peter, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks to our guests for taking out the time from your important work to come here today. We have a focused topic as a board on each of our alliance areas, and we've chosen to bring the West Suffolk HR team and the staff perspective, because it's been such a successful, a really impressive journey, I think, and a story we'd like to tell. And one that colleagues will say is very much remains in progress. But I'd like to hand over to Jeremy to lead the team. Welcome.
Jeremy, welcome. Welcome to colleagues. Over to you.
Thank you, Will. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for letting us join you. This morning, I'm Jeremy Over. I'm the Exec Director for Workforce and Communications at West Suffolk, and I am joined by...
Good morning. I'm Claire Sorensen, Deputy Director of Workforce at West Suffolk Hospital.
And I'm Paul Pearson, Staff Side Lead and Suffolk Area Health Branch Secretary.
Thanks, Paul. We prepared some slides to help, and presumably somebody is controlling those. That's great. Thank you very much. I'll try to avoid being Chris Whitty and asking for
you might need to be, Jeremy.
No problem at all.
There is a clicker somewhere, isn't there? Oh, you've got it. You've got it. Well done. Yeah.
Okay, good. So what we would like to do is to share with you our story of what we've been working on over the last few years. This is very much a journey, not a destination. And when you look at the title of what we have prepared, on the one hand, you might say, well, is this just about how you do HR in your organization? Or is this about culture? Well, actually, what this is about is the link between the two, and how HR practice in our organization has evolved as we have appreciated its impact on teams and on individuals in the organization, and how they feel about working for us as their employer. This is one piece of a jigsaw puzzle that has been about developing the culture of our organization, and probably the best way to describe the cultural development of any organization is that there are many pieces to that jigsaw, and the picture that the jigsaw represents is always evolving. You never reach a point where you think, job done, everything is perfect, and everything is not perfect at West Suffolk. Shock horror, but this is part of our journey of improvement. So we'll share what we've been working on. For the last few years, we've had a people and culture plan at West Suffolk, and you can see there on the slides what the goal of that plan has been. What do we want people to think and feel about what it's like to work in our organisation? A real aim of our focus being on people's well-being, and we want our staff, our teams, to recognise that they will be treated with civility, compassion and respect, including when things go wrong, when things don't happen as expected, or when mistakes are made, when there may be outcomes that people aren't expecting. And it is in those sorts of situations where HR policies come in to help guide us with the response to when things go wrong, and the impact of being involved in those processes can be significant for people. A particular part of our recent history as an organisation is what we would refer to as the West Suffolk Review, and that resulted, it was an independent external review to some serious failings in decision making and in handling of a set of circumstances, and the learning from that has formed a significant part of the work that we're describing today. If you're familiar or have heard or read about the events that are part of the West Suffolk Review, You may already know that we had an overall OD plan which responded to that, and you can see on the slide there a range of actions that we've taken in response to that review, which was published a few years ago, relating to events that took place around sort of 2017, 2018. This work that we're describing today is part of that response, because it is all about the development of our culture. When things go wrong in an organisation, when there is an organisational response to that, there are ripples from those processes. There are stories that are told within the organisation about, what's happened, what has it been like to have experienced the organisational response to something going wrong. And that becomes the fabric, the culture of what people think and feel about an organisation. And that is why we think the transformation, the modernisation of our HRCs and our practice is really, really important. I'm going to hand over to Claire, who is going to describe in a bit more detail the ethos of the work we've been doing, where that is embedded, and to give you a better feel for what is now different.
Thank you, Jeremy. So we started our journey by committing to a session, or a number of sessions actually, held by Northumbria University in partnership with Merseycare. And some of you may have heard around the work that Merseycare have done around just and learning culture. We didn't, a conscious decision, we didn't just send HR colleagues, we actually had a number of colleagues there, including our chief executive, our workforce director, union colleagues were there. There were HR colleagues present, because that's obviously important too. We had patient safety leads there and other senior leaders from across the organisation. So a real cross section of colleagues to actually work through this programme. And very clearly it became apparent that we did need to change the way we were doing things when things went wrong, and not to plan. So as we've talked across the organisation and engaged with colleagues, we've always said that we need to think person first, not process. Prior to this, we perhaps always something went wrong, we jumped to a process. Would that be a disciplinary issue, or would it be a grievance? But no, let's think about the person. And when I say that, I mean not who's done it, but actually how can we support the person? How can we support them to understand and perhaps analyse what's gone wrong, and what are the learnings from that, and what is the most appropriate course of action? That does result in people feeling far more confident to speak up when things go wrong. And obviously that is key. We don't want things going unnoticed, buried, not brought to the surface, because we have to have that organisational learning. Learning is key, because actually it could have it's organisational learning that could impact on other areas of the organisation, and therefore we need to make changes. It encourages colleagues to speak up. We look at what went wrong, not who did it, we need to understand who is involved, but actually what went wrong, take the people out of it. This again drives people's confidence to speak up, and they'll do that without fearing blame, which is sometimes the point we get to in some HR processes. Thank you. Oh, sorry, I could. Right, yeah. So we started with our disciplinary policy. Now you'll notice up there we call the name has changed, completely intentional. Disciplinary sounds very punitive. We've made that step change. It's now around managing conduct. And our focus is wholly on informal early resolution first. If it doesn't warrant moving to a formal process, then we won't. Sometimes you can achieve the same outcomes with a much more of a supportive, restorative actions rather than jumping to the formal. There will be those cases, and this isn't that we're stepping away from managing formal cases, but sometimes it's not always needed. We want a kind and compassionate approach for all parties. Whatever HR process people find themselves in, whether you're the complainant or you're complained against, then it's not always a great place to be. We've changed our language and our policies, and I'll move on to there's probably really, you'll be able to see it very clearly. Just the change of language changes the feel of what we're doing. We're more outcome based. And the most important part is this incident and learning review process that we start with when an incident's brought to our attention. 4 steps. Do we need to move to a formal process or not? And every incident that comes to our table, that's the way we review it. Here, I'm not going to go through them, but there's a list of our policies that we've worked on, and it's shifting the focus to outcomes rather than the process. And I'm hoping you'll see the change in language there is far softer. So it's not the performance management policy, it's actually supporting performance. A different feel to it. I think now I'm going to pass on to Paul, because actually partnership working through all of this journey has been really, really important.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, so just a bit about me. For me, what makes me particularly tick is justice, equity in the work and fairness in the workplace. So I wanted the title of this, how to achieve this is partnership working to achieve that. So I moved into a staff side role because that was where I was, where my interest laid. And through partnership working, I could achieve those actions. And I just fully support what Jeremy and Claire have been saying. And the measurable for this, when we went on to the Just and Learning training, for instance, I was the only staff side presence in the training, and there were lots and lots of organisations who were there. And the reason I know that is because we were put into different exercise groups. And when we were talking about the obstacles to achieving what we were trying to achieve, very often from HR point of view, they were saying, we're having trouble achieving things. We haven't brought staff side with us. What a great idea. Wish we'd have done that. So that was a real factor in trying to move forward with changing wording on policies. For instance, disciplinary and those policies, we wanted to change the wording. It made sense to work in partnership to do that. So other measurables, for instance, for me, for partnership working is carers leave. We reintroduced carers leave, which was really important feedback that I was receiving on the staff side. So we reintroduced that into our policies. Working in partnership was the way that I could influence those decisions being made. And other things like disability leave as well, taking that out of the Bradford score, so we don't use that in any way to process the absence policy. What else have I got here? Yeah, and so just we are on the same platform in terms of aware that with partnership working, we all want to achieve, or all parties want to achieve the same goal, which is justice, fairness, equity, the right result for the right reasons.
So thank you. That's what we wanted to present to you. In closing, just to make reference to other events, I think there is a real risk that the totality of partnership working in the NHS is threatened by the industrial action, the national disputes that we're seeing across the service at the moment. And there are some things as individual providers or even individual systems that we feel we can't control. These are disputes with the government. What we really need to do is to protect and defend those elements of partnership working and relationships that are within our gift. And in a nutshell, the whole purpose of partnership working, from my perspective as an organisational leader, is that Paul and trade union colleagues can give me perspectives that I wouldn't otherwise see, and vice versa. And that is the relationship that we try to foster in spite of recurring industrial action.
Jeremy, colleagues, thank you very much. And Jeremy, you'll be very pleased to know, I'm sure, one of your first comments in your introduction was this work will never be finished and it's ongoing. And you wouldn't believe how much that would fitted into the earlier debates we've already had. So I think this is a common and recurring theme and actually very normal. But thank you very much. I'm going to go to Ewan and then Amanda and Richard. Ewan?
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy, Claire and Paul. Really, really excellent work. I'm lucky enough to be on the tail end of it, but a lot of this happened before I arrived. And just to re-emphasise the point that Will made about this being a never-ending journey, I just wanted to draw a parallel to the work that you've been doing with the work that we're also doing in patient safety, as an early adopter of the patient safety incident review framework, which takes a very, very similar approach. Curiosity in trying to understand what happened rather than seeking to blame, involving patients, staff and families. So just that there's some really common themes in the way that we approach all of our work, and just wanted to highlight that.
Okay, thank you, Ewan. Amanda?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Jeremy, Claire and Paul. Great presentation. So I've got a question and a potential opportunity. So my question so far is, given the brilliant work that you have done and will continue, have you noticed a positive step change in the staff survey results?
Go on, Jeremy.
Well, I've just received my staff survey for this year. I suppose not yet is the answer, but then nationally, since the pandemic, there has been a drop-off in the overall results within the staff survey. I suppose on a relative basis, the majority of our results in the organisation are better than the average that we see. I was talking in my presentation about the ripples that come from when things go wrong, and one of the significant areas of ripples we're seeing is around people's confidence to speak up probably as a result of what they understand from the West Suffolk Review and the associated events. We want to see more improvement in our staff survey results as a result of this work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Oh, go on,
And my opportunity question now.
Yeah.
Given the shift you've had in terms of your policy, and I love the way you've changed the policy from a negative to a positive, I'm just thinking opportunity to broaden that work across the system. So I'm just wondering what the appetite might be from yourselves in terms of collaborating across the system. So ultimately we get to a point of having maybe where it allows one policy as opposed to multiple policies per organisation, when in fact issues are very similar.
Sharing best practice is what we're all about across the system, and we must do that. Equally, these processes need to reflect the desired culture of an organisation, and you can't just drag and drop policies between organisations if you're going to do that authentically. So I think as long as organisations are signed up to the ultimate cultural goal of these processes and how they're designed.
Okay, thank you. Now, colleagues, we've got a few questions here, so if I could ask you to be as prompt as possible, Richard.
So Amanda stole my thunder, because that was going to be my question, just in terms of how do you know you're being successful, I guess. Obviously, staff survey is one aspect, but have you got kind of a mechanism to know, is this new approach? It feels like it should work, but just any indications of how it's going down?
We are seeing some significant improvement in our workforce KPIs at the moment, establishing a causal relationship between this work and turnover, which has improved by it's come down from something like 14% down to 10% over the course of the last 6 months, which is really significant. That causal relationship is hard to prove, but we are seeing improvement in a number of our workforce KPIs that we are satisfied with.
I mean, to be fair, also it takes time, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay, Fanwell.
Yes.
Thank you,
I just want
Chair.
to add something really.
Oh, go on, Paul.
So in terms of feedback to me and what my involvement is and how I've been able to influence. So flexible working requests, for instance, if there looks like there's a problem area with a particular, I can work in partnership behind the scenes with HR business partners that have been introduced to try and make things equitable across the organisation, so we can influence things like that. I think there are measurables that I see, so we talked last week about how to improve our feedback on the staff survey. People that are happy don't always fill in the surveys. So we had a big meeting last week at senior leadership level, wasn't it? We talked about how, and I was involved, so how are we going to get more people to feedback, because we want to know what's truly happening out there, and that will be the key, getting more people feeding back, not just people that are motivated for the wrong reasons maybe.
Yeah, noted. Yeah, Fanuel.
Thank you, Jeremy, and the team. I think just a comment first to say, any form of culture change, it does take time, and sometimes we set ourselves to fail by expecting to see sort of immediate results. So I think there is need to actually look at that sort of long-term process and keep going at it, because we might drop things that are working very well because we're expecting immediate change. A quick question is around, when we're looking at policies and all these things, fantastic. A lot of that sort of fails sometimes at implementation stage. So what support is being given to your managers and supervisors and the people that are actually going to be driving some of this to make sure that it's embedded and becomes part of the culture?
Yes, absolutely. In some ways, the policies or the documents are the backstop or the safeguards to make sure that that good practice is upheld. What we want to do is avoid them needing to be used in the first place. The development of our leaders and managers is a big part of our people and culture plan as well. And we've just launched a new suite of leadership and management development programs that have cultural development at their heart, and in particular, diversity and inclusion. We have an organisation that is incredibly diverse compared to the community that we serve. We have a significant number of staff who have joined us from other countries, and that cultural understanding in terms of speaking up, raising concerns, knowing that you'll be treated fairly when something goes wrong is another huge aspect of this work.
Okay, thanks. Now I've got 4 more, and then I'm going to have to draw the line. But could I ask you to just ask the question, then we'll see if we can treat them en bloc. So Paul first.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be brief because I found well sort of picked up where I was going with this. So I think you've described the building blocks, which is great. But there comes a point where you walk into an organization and the culture is palpably different. And I guess the question, $64 million question is, how do you measure that? And I think the answer has to be multiple factors, and how you start to bring it all together. So just picking up on Fanuel's point, which is to say, at what point do you know that the culture has indeed changed and everybody's walking the walk and talking the talk in terms of that culture element, and some further feedback on how that is gaining momentum would be really interesting for all of us as a system. Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think we'll take that as rhetorical and for future feedback. Yeah, Sharon.
Well, you've already possibly answered my question. I was just going to ask about how it links to your EDI agenda, the work that you're doing, not only because evidence shows that Black and minority ethnic staff are less likely to speak up because of fears about what might happen, but also overseas recruits. But I'm also interested in that overrepresentation of fitness to practice of ethnic minority staff as well. It's probably a comment, you've probably answered it, Jenny, but that is a concern, I think.
Come back to you, Jeremy. Frida?
I thank you for the presentation. This is a work of reflection, isn't it, from previous experience, essentially. And I just want to ask, in terms of sharing best practice across the system, as a doctor, we are heavily regulated, and I just want to know if any of those, if you've shared this practice, which is excellent, what work you've done to improve, and it's based on kindness and understanding and listening, and I just wonder, in terms of those principles and what you've described today, whether that's been shared to NHS England and wider, because surely there are several organisations where similar things have and will happen in the future. And I just want to know, in terms of development of NHS workforce and their well-being, how far has this been shared?
Okay, and I'll come back to you, Jeremy, and then finally, Kath.
Thank you. Part comment, and I suppose a question in there as well. So we're doing a huge amount of work in MSFT on our culture. We've got some really significant cultural challenges. And I suppose what I'm wondering is as you're opening the door to start more openly talk about it, are you finding that actually what it's causing is a resultant increase in cases, increase in people speaking up? Because certainly what I find we've done is we've uncovered, or we've taken up the underground behaviours, and now we're talking about it. Our numbers are going up and up and up. So in terms of comment impact, I think we need to, as a board, recognise that this could take years to see measurable improvements. But I see improvements are increases in number of people who are raising concerns. That's an improvement. Other people might think that's a bad thing. I'm just wondering what your perspective is on, in terms of, you know, I think 4 years at NSFT at least before I see those marked improvements. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are in terms of, particularly in light of Let Be as well. I think we have to be mindful collectively of what may come out of that with people raising concerns. How do we make sure we manage expectations that improvements aren't seen as reductions?
Okay, so 3 questions essentially. Sorry for. Do you want to deal with them in reverse order? First of all, the case build-up numbers, reflections on the Lucy Letby position, and so on. Paul, are you being collared for this one?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to answer any question really. We have measured. We have noticed increased cases. Yeah, we have, and I know there's awareness on other organisations as well. I'm in Unison works in the background, which supports the comment that Amanda made earlier about policies. We work in the back. We work regionally, so we do have a lot of information that comes to there. So we are aware other organisations have an increase. Also, in terms of, there's been some cases, for instance, where there haven't started in the right platform. However, I have a one-to-one with Claire every week. I also have Jeremy regularly timetabled, as well as he's available. If I was to send Jeremy a message, can we have a chat? Then that would happen, and we've certainly done that. So there has been some cases that need to change the direction that they've stepped off on the wrong foot, and we can do that straight away with partnership working. So that can also reduce the amount of cases that go formally as well.
But noted, it takes time, and it's an iterative process. Jeremy, EDI and degree of sharing.
Yes, well, we're certainly not the pioneers of the just and learning culture philosophy. Claire talked about the work that Merseycare Trust in the Northwest have done, and they've certainly been promoting this work for quite a few years. But certainly from Bury St Edmunds, we're very happy to share what we've been learning, and we'll continue to do that, and hopefully today's useful.
Okay, and anything specifically on the EDI point?
Anti-racism charter.
Yeah, so as Ewan has probably shared with you already, we have identified diversity and inclusion as one of our top strategic priorities for the development of the organisation this year and beyond. There's a national improvement plan for this. I've talked about our international recruits, the differential in experience that is identified through the RES scheme provides the data and the drive for improvement. One of the benefits of this work that we presented on today has been about reducing the number of formal cases that actually happen. So the RES data shows that we're not seeing a differential based on race in terms of experience of this process, but we do, as is common in other parts of the NHS, around things like recruitment, and that's the main area of our focus in terms of reducing the discrimination that is reported.
Okay, so colleagues, shall we say thank you to Jeremy, Claire and Paul for that very interesting discussion or promotion of the discussion, essentially around cultural shift and also recognition that this takes time, but because it takes time doesn't mean we don't do it, and that the sooner we start, the better. And thank you as well for the wide offer of sharing. So with that, colleagues, just a minute or so before 11 o'clock, we've been going 2 hours. Should we take a 10-minute break and then reconvene? So we'll start sharp again at 10 past 11. Thanks very much, everybody. Thank you. Right, everybody. 10 past.
Bring some biscuits.
No biscuits, I'm afraid. No. 10 past 11. We said we'd restart sharp. So with that, I'm now going on to the pre-delegation assessment framework pro forma ahead of national submission. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. So hopefully colleagues will recognise this, as we've been here before about a year ago in relation to our specialised commissioning services. So NHS England have started a process about a year or so ago to look to delegate responsibility for elements of specialised commissioning back to the integrated care boards. So this report effectively is the culmination of a lot of work that's been happening over the last year or so, and it's culminated in what's called a PDAF, which is a pre-delegation assessment framework, which is in the pack, which sets out effectively almost a mutual assurance process between NHS England and the ICBs that make up the East of England region in terms of the delegation, safe delegation of 59 specific services through to the integrated care boards from the 1st of April 2024. And you'll see, hopefully those who've had a chance reading the PDAF, it sets out some of the elements that NHS England and ourselves need to be aware of in terms of that transfer. As I said, it's 59 services, not every single one. There's a lot more than that, but these are the ones in the first round that it's feel more appropriate that come down to the ICBs to commission. The way in which we're proposing to do that, and this is similar across other regions as well, is that there'll be a multi-ICB committee. So the 6 ICBs that make up the East of England will act as one specialised commissioning committee. Myself as Exec Director with lead responsibility for SpecCom will be our rep on that board, and we'll make effectively mutual decisions across the 6 ICBs with NHS England as appropriate. The team that supports this, so around 48 whole-time equivalents that currently sit within NHS England, so they're the team that effectively do all the aspects of specialised commissioning, from the commissioning, the performance, the finance, etc., will transfer in time to Bedfordshire, Luton and Milton Keynes ICB. So the 6 ICBs have discussed that and agreed that BLMK will be the host from 2025 for those staff at the earliest. But even over the next year, they'll effectively work, their accountability line will rest with BLMK. So there's just a few things to note as part of the next steps on page 144 in the pack. You'll see there ICB categorisation. There's 3 categories that can be the outcome of this process with NHS England through the assurance process, category 1 through to category 3, which is effectively everything from full delegation, complete confidence, through to an ICB is not ready for full delegated commissioning. Where we expect to be as the 6 together is that we will get category 1, that's the assessment that's been made by ourselves with NHS England, but clearly it's got to go through a process to confirm whether that is the case. A few important things to note, just quickly, those bullet points there. So safe delegation checklist, there is a huge template, we love a template, which sets out all the various things that we need to do over the next 6 months to ensure that safe transfer of responsibility. We need to finalise the details of the hosting arrangement. So as I just alluded to with BLMK, so what does that mean in practice? How will those staff work with SNE, etc.? The staffing model, partly what I just said, and the multi-ICB agreement. So how will the 6 fully work together? I've given you a little bit of a sense of that with BLMK and that committee that will sit across the 6. Really, really importantly, and Howard may come in later, detail and confirmation of the financial allocation. So at the moment, the national expectation is over an 8-year phased transition. We'll move the funding formula from where it is at the moment, which is on the basis of spend, to actually on population and need. And that could be a significant change for all ICBs in terms of whether you're a net winner or a net loser in that. And there's more work to do, I think it's fair to say, Howard, on actually what those numbers look like and what the potential impact would be on us. And then final bit there, most ICB patients and service flow across borders. So we're not a significant host of specialised commissioning services. ESNEF have some services, but a number of our other ICBs neighbouring have much bigger, like Cambridge, Norfolk, have much bigger centres around specialised commissioning. But it's important, obviously, that SNE is a key player in those decisions because they do impact on our local population. So for today, Chair, it was really endorsement agreement of the PDAF which effectively articulates the case for the delegation to us. The timeline for that in the key issues at the end of the paper on page 148 effectively sets out that it will then go for consideration as part of the wider East of England submission. And the national board is meeting on the 7th of December across all of the regional submissions to make a decision. We will be then setting up that multi-ICB committee to meet from April that I described. We'll also importantly be setting up our own. So we're just working through our scheme of delegation, etc. But I think it's important that we have a group or committee. We'll agree the naming of that in our governance. At the moment, we've got that reporting through to the SPED committee, which is strategic programs and elective and diagnostics. But effectively, if I'm the rep going on our behalf to the board, I'm keen that we have a wider forum locally with representation from our providers as well as commissioners to actually inform and take a view that I can then take up to that committee, and also obviously deal with any local issues that might transpire. And then obviously subject to all that, we go live from 1st of April.
Richard, thank you very much. And Richard, would it be fair to say as well, this is substantially the same or very similar to documents that actually board members have seen since 2022?
Yes.
So
No fundamental shift. Okay. Let me go to Frida and then Howard. So Frida.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. When I was reading this paper, what came into my head was why, in some ways, are we shifting responsibility to the ICBs? Can I ask that question?
You can, yeah.
And secondly, what does it mean for patient care, the logistics of patient care? Because that concerns me. You know, at the moment, we have a system for specialised commissioning, and we're going to change that, divide that up with 6 ICBs in East of England. And so does that mean, in terms of patient flow, patient movement, you know, how does it impact upon me on the ground as a frontline worker?
So in reverse order, I think as of 1st of April, there'll be no particular impact. I think we're not looking at a big bang from 1st of April. Suddenly, great, we've got these 59 services, right, let's completely change all the pathways. A, we haven't got the capacity, and B, I don't think that would be the right thing to do. I think over time, we will agree which of those 59 actually make sense locally for us to review. So as an example, there's some of them on the list of 59, which answer your first question, I do think makes sense to be more locally focused. And actually we look at the whole continuum, the whole pathway, rather than sometimes this kind of element that we aren't as quite engaged with at the end on specialised commissioning. Actually, there's an opportunity to look more creative with the whole pathway, flows, etc. But again, we haven't agreed as a 6 quite yet of the 59, which is, say, the first handful that we want to kind of start looking at. The other thing I'd say is, looking at ANZA, is there is an appetite from our acute providers, I say acute deliberately, rather than acute and community, across the region to come together potentially as a specialist commissioning collaborative. So actually, I'm really keen that we start, as I said earlier, seeing, like we always do in SNE, that yes, there is a role as a commissioner and our partners, providers, but let's work together across which of those areas that would make more sense to do something different locally.
So it could essentially improve patient experience.
Yeah. And just related to all that, Richard, if we get the national go-ahead is given in December, perhaps a further update to the board in January?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. Howard and then Maddie.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, Richard's obviously right. There is a significant risk, not just pertaining to the method and how the funding's allocated on the population basis, but also I always come out in a bit of a cold sweat if I remember my days as in the CCGs, actually back in the PCTs, I should say, sorry, when we always waited with bated breath for the final numbers coming through from specialist commissioning, because the other risk, of course, is that there are some really high cost individual patients that may land on our particular patch, basically. So, so there's a couple of risks there, and it's a little bit unnerving at this point that the way the budget allocation and also how a risk share would work across the region hasn't yet explicitly been sort of laid out. But I just wanted to assure the board that we, both myself and Richard, but through my finance channels, escalating that through the regional director of finance. There is a finance group that is set up, and we're fully engaged in that. So, and the regional director of finance has assured, although I'd like to see that sort of, written down in terms of the planning, etc., that there'll be negligible risk or impact expected next financial year. But we've really got to see the detail, I think.
Okay, not a long-term game. Now, colleagues, I'm going to go to Maddie and then Amanda, but we've got to pick up speed. Maddie.
Thank you. So I was just reflecting on our learning from the transfer of pharmacy, optoms and dental. And I think there was something that was really valuable, not just for the staff teams, but more broadly around relearning or learning about the services. So what's beneath the 59 in order to really make the integration and the join up happen for our patients. So that was just one thing to note. And the second thing is you mentioned that the staff were all transferring to BLMK. And I was just also reflecting on our learning that having colleagues within our own team to be able to work with BLMK, in our case, Hearts and West Essex, was so important, but that's something we've resourced. So I don't know if there's any scope for negotiation there. Otherwise, you'll be multitasking as ever. Thank you.
Richard, can I take that as a rhetorical question for future development?
Yes.
Post-approval?
Yes.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you. Amanda.
Thank you, Chair. So it's just a comment really, and given the reference to risk a couple of times, it's just a thought on whether we should include this as a risk on not the BAF necessarily, but at least the Directorate risk register in the first instance.
And I'm seeing Richard nodding, so I'm going to take that as a yes. Okay, so with those comments, colleagues, are we happy to approve for national submission to national? Look forward to a yes, fingers crossed, in the December meeting, and then update at the January board. Yeah. Everybody content? Great, thanks. Finance report, Howard.
Thank you, Chair. So, as usual, the report is in two parts. I'll take it as read. The first is in relation to the ICB finances, and the second is in relation to the whole system finances. So firstly, I'll start with an update on the key variances for the Integrated Care Board, and a reminder that this ICB has a total budget of £2.1 billion and an approved financial plan to deliver a surplus of £2.6 million in order to offset an equivalent deficit at West Suffolk Foundation Trust. At the close of accounts in August, we're still on target to deliver that surplus for 2023-24. However, the ICB is facing some quite significant headwinds, the most significant of which is a forecasted adverse variance that's on the report of about 2 million has now grown to about 14 million forecast in August. And this appears to be due to a number of pricing and volume issues and is recognised to be a national issue, but we're reviewing obviously where mitigations might be possible. We're also experiencing some additional pressures around continuing healthcare pricing packages, and the spend on mental health is also forecasted to go out by another £2 million, largely due to out of area and placements and increased packages of care. The combination of these issues has resulted in very little remaining flexibility and has been the subject of some considerable focus at the ICB's Financial Recovery and Sustainability Group, as well as the ICB Finance Committee, which meets, the Financial Recovery Group meets every other week, and the ICB Finance Committee meets every month. Whilst I would still have confidence in the ICB's ability to deliver on its plan in 2023-24, it's becoming more clear now that this is going to become very challenging as we move towards 2024-25, which talks again to the urgent need to develop the medium-term financial plan, really. Just a quick note on the ICB's efficiency programme, which is forecasted to deliver about £12.5 million of savings against a target of £13.5 million. This does assume an acceleration of delivery in a couple of areas, including continuing healthcare and prescribing. The current risk rating suggests that about 8 million is very likely to be delivered, or already has been, and that includes about 3 million of corporate savings, which is in part, which I think has been a really strong response to the challenge of the 30% reduction in running costs that we have to deliver by the end of next financial year. In relation to the wider ICS finances, so I just want to remind everyone that in the context of when I say system now, I'm really only referring to the NHS organisations that form part of our integrated care system. So ESNEFT, West Suffolk, East, and the ICB, of course. The overall approved plan for the system is to break even, and as I've mentioned before, that includes a deficit plan at West Suffolk Foundation Trust of 2.7 million, offset by a surplus that's held by the ICB. The West Suffolk Foundation Trust deficit was supported this year with £7 million of non-recurrent funding. And as of last month, the system was projecting a £6 million deficit year to date, which was about £3 million off the approved plan. And that £3 million is attributable in full to the West Suffolk Foundation Trust position. And I know Ewan's going to be talking about the financial recovery plan that's ongoing at the Trust at the moment. Since the notification of that year-to-date deficit, just in terms of governance, the ICB Finance Committee did request that West Suffolk produce that financial recovery plan, and they did so at the September meeting. I'll pause there to take any questions, Chair, and then perhaps seamlessly move over to Ewan's update on the West Suffolk Financial Recovery Plan.
Thanks, Howard. Makes sense. Any immediate questions for Howard? Otherwise, understood, and noted the forecast, but the risks around that forecast. In which case, happy to go to Ewan for the West Suffolk update. Thank you, Ewan.
Yeah, so as Howard said, our financial position has deteriorated in year, and that's driven largely by three things: a shortfall in delivery of cost improvement plans, underfunding of pay awards, and the financial impact of industrial action. We have a revised forecast of a deficit of 6.7 million, which requires a number of things to be delivered, including a revised cost improvement plan of 5 million, elective recovery fund assumptions of £5 million, and some additional pay initiatives of £3.4 million. We should start to see a significant impact of the recovery plan in the October position, which will be reported in November. There has been a slight improvement in the rate of financial underperformance in August. We've got some additional resource brought in to help with the recovery plan. We've been working with members of Howard's team over the last couple of months in the development of the plan. This plan is still stretching, but we are committed to delivering it. There's sort of the three main risks around it include the delivery of cost improvement, particularly over the winter period. There's some significant uncertainty around the scale of elective recovery funding, but certainly the costs of industrial action are escalating, and the ability to deliver the additional pay controls whilst at the same time maintaining elective and emergency performance. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Ewan. Any questions or points for you, Frida?
I just want to clarify in terms of the cost of industrial action. Surely that's the same for all acute trusts.
Yes, it is, and you across the country there's significant deterioration in acute trust performance as a result. One of the things that was done in April was a change to the ERF thresholds, which allow some of that financial deterioration to be managed through that funding. That how that's being managed for the rest of the year hasn't yet been formally announced. But yeah, no, it is applicable to all acute providers.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Angela.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Ewan. I know we've been having some discussions as acute trusts of how we could support each other more, probably in terms of staffing resource, and because we've got some specialties that we perhaps might struggle more to have perhaps medical cover for, whatever, and certainly vice versa. So I'm just wondering if that might also be another route to pursue, really quite actively in the next few months. Thank you.
Yes, it's definitely worth pursuing, and as you say, there are a mixture of specialties where you're more challenged and we're more challenged. We should definitely, and I know our teams are exploring and taking up those advantages. Whether those will, within year, lead to a very significant change in the financial position, I doubt. We also need to really explore whether there are longer term provider collaboration options that will help the underlying financial position and deliver high quality care for our populations.
Let's take that in two parts, if I may. So there's the confirmation of the ongoing action that's already there, but also then some further discussions that perhaps you would pick up outside the meeting.
Well, we have a board to board which is being scheduled. One of the things that we're going to be discussing that is provider collaboration.
Okay, but we don't have a date for that yet.
I'm not sure it's been confirmed. October or November.
Okay, let's take that and report back. That would be great. Thank you very much. Before I come to Howard to wrap on this item, any other questions from board members? Howard, all yours. Oh, sorry, Paul. I beg your pardon.
Yeah, just wanted to reinforce the point that I think we've been talking about acute collaboration for some time, and I think some of the solution to this is sort of accelerating some of those conversations to see what a joined up working could actually be. So I think if we can support that anyway, we'd be happy to. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Noted. Agreed. Howard.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just give some reflections from Finance Committee, but I also just wanted to say that this is really difficult, and if we don't do anything about it, it's going to get more and more difficult. And I also wanted to commend really West Suffolk, because I think they've been incredibly open and transparent, and Ewan's made some references to support that we've been allowed to give, I guess, really, but I think it's really encouraging the system working. So I just wanted to say that really. It did go to the Finance Committee on September and was met with the same level of thanks, I suppose, but also a lot of check and challenge, as you would expect, really. And there were three key recommendations that came out of that. The first was that we should provide some detailed check and challenge on the actual financial recovery plan and make some recommendations on system-wide cost and investment controls that in actual fact we're probably going to be required to make anyway by NHS England. Particularly if West Suffolk Foundation Trust don't actually deliver on their plan. That's sometimes known as the double lock. So I'm preempting everyone with the language here. The first draft of that check and challenge has been done in conjunction with colleagues in West Suffolk and with colleagues in ESNEFT. So I think it really has been a good example of system working, and it's going to be presented at the Trust Financial Recovery Group tomorrow. Haven't been through that in detail, but it will obviously highlight areas of potential risks and start the discussion for the next step, which has been recommended by the Finance Committee, which is that we need to start thinking urgently about what the system plan is going to look like, to my language now, to how we potentially try to consume our own smoke as a system. If West Suffolk do go deliver a £6.7 million deficit, that's £4 million off plan, which effectively means we won't be allowed just to say that means the whole ICS goes £4 million off. We'll be expected to come up with a solution for that. So that's the sort of consuming our smoke, and we're starting to think about what some of those mitigations would look like. Part of the mitigations obviously include part of the check and challenge that we'll have with the trust to see what more can be done, including acceleration of the existing program. And the third strand, I think, leads to some of the other comments around the longer term strategy. So there was a definite urgency around how we start to deliver that, what that plan looks like. Part of the answer, there was a lot of discussion around provider collaboration. That's part of it. The medium-term financial plan, the demand and capacity review, all those sorts of things. I think we need to start pulling together quite urgently to try and get as far on top of this as we can. So it's encouraging to see some of those strands coming together. I guess I would just end by saying we just, as a board, need to say this is an urgent piece of work, and we can't just let it slide. I don't think we can just say it's okay here at the minute and look how much worse it is in other systems. I think that's the wrong thing to do. We have an opportunity to manage this in a way that potentially other systems haven't been able to manage. So I think that's a good challenge for us personally. I'll end there.
Thank you, Howard. And unless anybody says they object to Howard's proposal there for the urgency and importance to which the board associate this matter, I'm going to say that we agree. Everybody content? Okay, so let's resolve that in appropriate words in the minutes. Joe, thank you. And any other questions or comments on the presentations received? Otherwise, with the exception of that urgency and importance issue, reports noted. Okay, great. In which case, thank you, Howard. Thank you, Ewan. ICB performance report. Paul, I'm going to ask you to lead off on this, but also to note the time.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
You'll be pleased to know that in the interest of openness and transparency, you've got in front of you all of the performances, all of the actions, and all the narrative that preoccupied our ICB committees in terms of the performance. So I'm not going to go through those slides. You'll be pleased to know, unless there are any particular questions that come out of that. But what I'd like to focus on is a couple of things, if I may, in terms of SOAC activity. SOAC met and reviewed performance dashboards essentially, and has chosen to focus on probably three aspects for the next time around, which is cancer performance, mental health at various placement, which is usually important, and we've already heard some conversation around C2 category response times, which actually are particularly important, and we're not where we would like to be around some of that. Of course, you would expect us to have some quality focus, and we've already heard talked a bit about LEDB, and we had an early conversation system to make sure we sought assurances that people would take that seriously and take accountability for the outcomes of the LEDB, what will be the LEDB inquiry as it comes forward. And of course, then a number of things were discussed around dementia, learning disability, etc. is there for you to see. And then we clearly had a focus on winter planning, which we already heard about and talked through the approach, and that was supported, and clearly our next steps around JFP and future planning. So all of those things really are very much in tandem with what the board has been talking about. So again, there's a huge synergy around some of that. But at this point, SOAC has chosen not to escalate anything. The one point though I would like to just sort of, I suppose, warm up the board a little bit is the impact of industrial action. Whilst I think there has been some huge amount of planning, and a huge thank you for everybody involved and the forbearance of our patients who have been scheduled and rescheduled continually through industrial action. And we are currently maintaining our trajectory for 65 weeks recovery. But it is very likely, given the oncoming strike action, that we will start deviation to that performance. So again, we are going through the detail of that. Our acute colleagues are working really hard to try and mitigate the impact. And in future report, we'll certainly bring back report and deviation around some of that, because that has some significant impact on our patient recovery, etc. So just like to point that out as part of an ongoing emerging theme of how we move forward. The second point really, at the last board report, I trailed the process around the end of year assurance and how it was going to happen. I'm pleased to say we had end of year assurance meetings and end around conclusion. I chose to include what I think is probably the nicest letter I've ever seen coming from a regional colleague to say, well done. And I chose to include that because actually it is probably the most friendly and nice letter I've ever seen at the end of year. But there are clearly some challenges within some of that. So I have included within the report essentially the fuller detail of the outcome of that conversation that we had. And I'd like to just pick out a few things, if I may. So I think the first thing was they felt that we were a maturing system with very robust governance. They certainly felt that the SOAC approach was very mature in the thing that we talked about and had a difficult conversation. They clearly welcome our work on health and equality, which we've talked about at length within this board. Joint forward plan was cited as well. Our commission process, and now we are developing commission policies and all things was really welcomed. The intensive work on workforce was clearly a sort of signal, and again some of the work on our finances. But they do remind us that we do have challenges on our RTTI 65-week recovery and elective waiting lists. They do remind us that we do have some challenge around our urgent care, and they do remind us we do have challenges around our cancer work. In other words, whilst you're doing really well, don't lose focus on these deliverables that you need to deliver. So broadly, really positive. We remain a solid soft 2 with aspiration to soft 1 is where we landed. But as ever, these things are fragile and can't require maintain focus as we move forward. So Chair, I'll stop there and happy to try and answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, and never relax. It's never done, is it? So good report, but still work to do. And perhaps we could particularly note, Joe, the ongoing Lucy Letby work, and look forward to the future reports on that, and also thanks to colleagues around the industrial action and support from all and the ongoing situation that Paul articulated in some detail. So let's note thanks for the work of all in that respect. Any questions or points for Paul on this paper? Otherwise, with those comments, shall we say received and noted?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Next item is the BAF. I'm going to you, Amanda.
Thank you very much, Chair. So I guess there are 7 key points I would like to update board on. Number 1, we have been on a journey, haven't we, for several months as a board in terms of the look, the feel, the shape of our BAF. From a recent board development, we undertook to do further work on how the BAF could be redesigned. I trailblazed a bit of that at the last board meeting, and today, for the first time, we see the new look BAF in its current state. And hopefully board members will agree it's more visually impactful and therefore more public facing. So since we last saw the BAF, we have actually added 2 new risks. Number 1 is relating to the freedom to speak up. And we know as an ICB, we need to have a freedom to speak up policy in place by January 24. And then for primary care, those arrangements have a longer time frame of around 18 months. However, we do have plans in place to implement sooner rather than later, and that's contained in our risk alongside the associated work with fit and proper person test. The second new risk that we've added this time is a risk that we've previously had on the BAF probably 18 months ago, and that's pertaining to the RAC at West Suffolk Hospital. And we are doing quite a lot of good work through Paul and his leadership in terms of making sure that we have continued grip and the like. So in terms of our new look BAF, we want to strengthen, so we have a BAF that reflects this system assurance approach as well. And we, along with Susanna's team, have been working through how we can actually translate the system assurance framework into BAF going forward. A lot of conversations, a lot of work is in train, and we're hoping that we can actually bring that into our BAF at the November presentation. When we presented the BAF to the recent audit committee, it was not only well received, but they actually suggested a new addition, if you like, and I think it's something that we want to take forward, and I would be recommending this to the board. And it's really simple, but I think quite effective. So what we're hoping to do is actually add the relevant risk to our board report front sheet. So as a board, we can focus on the agenda item and how it links into our risks going forward. As I've previously said, the inference now on board assurance framework is focusing on the assurance and giving the board the assurance that we have got grip and we're mitigating as we move forward. We've previously included risk appetite, and that was from a recent audit, and that continues to be a common theme going forward. And finally, last but not least, we have actually been subject to a recent internal audit of all things risk management, and the report was presented at the last audit committee, and I'm pleased to report through that work and our continuous improvement, we actually fared a substantial assurance. So in summary, Chair, I think this new look is a step in the right direction. Further work to be done through the inclusion of staff, but I think we're getting there, and I think will enable us as a board to really grip and make sure that we're focusing the right energy and effort on our risk moving forward.
And Amanda, would it be fair to say also that at the next iteration, reflecting in risk 8, the rewording
Absolutely,
that
thank you, Chair.
Yeah,
Indeed.
so that will come to the next board.
It will, and as we speak, that actually is being added through the report that will go to the exec committee before it comes to board in November.
Okay, thank you. Jeff?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Amanda, for that update. Fairly reflected our discussions at the audit committee. I have to say I was a little critical of the old BAF, but I think the current one, the updated one, is very clear, and it's got all the relevant facts in there, and it's much easier to read and assess. So thank you to you and your team for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Howard?
Yeah, thank you. So Yeah, I also think the new format's really good. So well done to the team. Much better than looking through all those old spreadsheets. I think it would be great now to link the BAF risks to the agenda, for example, on the board.
Yeah.
So when you look at the front pages, for example, it doesn't reference the BAF risk, and I think that's a simple early step that we can start to do to make the connection between those.
Shall I take that? Can we take that as agreed? Yeah, agreed. Sorry, Howard.
That was it.
Oh, that was it. Oh, sorry. I thought I was interrupting you. Beg your pardon. Okay. Any other questions or comments, or with that work ongoing, the work in progress, the amendments to wording and the paper header adjustments, additions, everybody content, approved? Great. Amanda, I'm sticking with you for fit and proper person.
Great. Okay, thank you very much, Chair. So we as a board last January approved our fit and proper person test policy, but we have actually updated in light of the Tom Clark review and all of the associated work from the Lucy Letby case. So whilst we already had the policy in place, we have actually strengthened, and you will see attached to the report an updated policy. And for ease of reference, I've actually updated the additions in red. So from the end of September, in fact, a few days' time, we need to be ensuring as a board that we have implemented the updated fit and proper person test policy. And there are 7 new requirements that we need to be making sure are in place, and they are contained within section 2.6 of the report. And I'm pleased to confirm all of those measures are being worked through. And we're also going to be doing a training session in October for the HR team, but wider executive team, because we need to make sure that the self-assessments for all of the board members is up to date prior to any formal submission to region, which the chair will undertake at the end of Q4 next year. And in addition to that, we will be writing out to board members in the coming weeks, just to inform board members, but also give the offer of rejection if indeed any board member does not want their information contained within the new fields within ESR. So that's something that we are moving forward. But I think in the spirit of time, I'll pause there, but wanted to ensure that as a board, that we are reminded of the work, the updating and the implementation in a few days' time.
And that this will be nationally compliant.
Absolutely.
Frida and then Ruth.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'd just like to say I really like the new BAF as well. Just to say, this applies to every member of the board, not just the executive, non-executive, everybody.
Yes.
So is there a chance that, because I read in the report that we should be looking to have it as part of our board development, perhaps as a group, we should think about what it actually means, not assume that we just tick boxes. It's
Yeah,
quite
absolutely.
relevant
I think
to
we
our
could do
entity.
2 things, Frida. Number one, we can actually include it as a future board development. But the workshop that I was just referring to that we're planning to have in October, we could extend to members of the board as well, which is going to be a bit of a webinar. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We're happy to leave that to Amanda and team to resolve, aren't we?
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Ruth?
Yeah, as somebody who's deputising today, I just wondered if there needed to be reference to deputies in this.
Oh, that's a good point, isn't it?
That is a good point. Thank you, Ruth. I'll take that away.
Take that away. Yeah. Good spot, Ruth. Well done. Yeah. Thank you. Any other comments or otherwise with those suggestions for future work? Are we happy to endorse? Lovely. Thanks very much. In which case, moving on to item 18, the committee minutes and highlights reports, etc. What I propose to do is just quickly, well, as quickly as I can, whiz through them. And if the chair or indeed anybody has got any question that they'd like to raise, just stop me as I go through. Otherwise, if there is nothing to say, we'll simply say en bloc, received and noted. So audit committee, 14th of September. Jeff, did you want to say anything?
Just to say that we've still got the delay in the external audit of both the CCG and the ICB accounts. We're supposed to, or the external audit suggested that we might get the accounts during October, but I don't know what the latest position is. I'll catch up with Howard afterwards. But otherwise, That's all I need to raise. Thank you.
So noted. Okay, no questions. Remuneration and HR, which is led at the moment by Fanwell. So anything to say? Nothing? No. No questions. Noted. Finance Committee, which has been led, and we've already said thank you to Edward Creasy, but we have Howard here as well. So anything to add, Howard? No. Questions? No. Excellent. Quality Committee, Fanwell, again, nothing from you, Leanne? No, and no questions. Noted. People Committee, again, Amanda, anything to add? Noted. People in, People in Communities, again, anything there, Amanda, to flag? Noted. Estates, nothing, no questions. Excellent. And then the Strategic Digital Investment and Assurance Committee. Any questions on that report? No. Noted. Wonderful. Next item is the attendance log. We're only asked to receive a note. Unless there are any questions, I'm going to take it as received and noted. Any other business? Now, nobody's notified me of any, so I'm going to look around the table now, and you have to wave at me, but I don't see any hands raised, so no other business. The next meeting is the 28th of November, so look forward to that. And the final item is any questions that have come in during the meeting from members of the public. And Simon, you're shaking your head?
None at all.
No questions raised. Okay, in which case, at 11:52, I think 8 minutes ahead of schedule, which I must admit has surprised me. So well done, everybody. Shall we say meeting closed and see you all on the 28th of November? And we now have a short break before the part 2, which we should be able to commence at 12 o'clock, I think, with luck. So should we call it closed?
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Lovely. Thank you very much indeed.